very sad, that he became that way through what was modeled for him through his father, who she believes is a psychopath, and taught him to win at all costs. And there was nothing that mattered really in here. It's all external.
And then you
So
couple that with a
we
doormat of
are
a
on
mom.
YouTube and we are public. So just so everybody knows, what we say can be heard.
I'm not scared.
Yes. It says something about where our country is when you say that, Skip.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's why we got to keep talking
Well, we can keep talking
about it.
about it on another day. But today is for the tower in the Tarot. And so those of you who are joining us on YouTube, you've missed our first hour of discussion, which often gets to be quite animated, to say the least. And you're welcome to join us on our Zoom panel and to join our first hour. Then you won't miss anything. But and good evening, Art. Nice to see you. And so, but here, what we are doing is we are going through the tarot deck one by one. And the reason we're doing that is because the tarot cards represent archetypal forces in our lives. And they apply to all of our lives. They always have, and they always will. And to every nation, racial group, religion, everybody has these cards applied to them. And that's why, because they're archetypal, that's why they haven't changed in 600 years since they were first developed. And some people say that they point back even to philosophies in Egypt, even long before the Christian era. And so, and they might well, because as I say, these are all forces in human life that are always and everywhere the same. And so the point is that if you understand these archetypal forces, you're going to better understand your own life and how to live a better life, because you'll be able to analyze it more thoroughly. And so tonight we're going to talk about the tower, and the panel is here to do that. And I'm going to turn it over first to Nick Lawrence, and I'm going to give Nick on the screen the two cards that he likes to compare, which is a starting point, and then we'll go on from there. So Nick, is everybody seeing the
Yes.
the two towers here?
Cool.
Yes.
Okay, so Nick, you're good to go.
All right, thank you. Okay, so with these, they actually are not as drastically different as some of the other ones. They're quite similar. The key difference is that the yods, the bits of flame that are around the characters, are constructed into a 12 yod flame of the zodiac on the left and a tree of life on the right. But apart from that, they're pretty much the exact same. So what I have prepared to talk about this evening is, firstly, the Tower of Babel, which is a story I'm sure most everybody is familiar with. A quick recap of the story.
Before you go to that,
okay,
would you just explain what a yod is?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A yod is a Hebrew letter. It is not the first letter in the alphabet, but I believe it's the 10th letter. And it's really a symbol of life force when it's used in the tarot.
Okay. So
it can be seen in the sun card.
So these little things that are on the two sides of the card
Yep.
are yods, and they represent life force.
And they're made with a single calligraphy stroke of over, down, over, like the lightning, the small lightning. Is it yod or yod?
I guess either.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry.
Okay. That's all right. You want to leave the cards up?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. All right. So the Tower of Babel. In the story, just for a quick recap, essentially, people are endowed with this creative ability. And because of that, they build this tower. And it says in the passage, we'll build a tower that reaches up into heaven. And as a result of this, God becomes frustrated with his people. He doesn't like what they're doing with their creative capacity, their life force. And because of that, he confounds their speech. He confounds their language to make it so all of the people that are involved in the creation of this tower and the city that's around it are unable to understand one another. So I think it's a brilliant story. It's super short. It's very to the point. I think it's probably in total less than a page long, and it speaks volumes. So the things that I have written down to talk about within the story is that it's a common theme, whether it be in the Bible, in the beginning of Genesis, or in other Kabbalistic books like the Sefer Yetzirah, which means the book of formation, that in the beginning, the world was constructed with speech. Particularly, it was shaped and brought into being with the Hebrew alphabet. And that's why the Kabbalists like to study the Hebrew alphabet and pore over the various manipulations that one can do with the Hebrew alphabet, the permutations of the letters together, the relationships with one another, the numerology associated with it, because they firmly believe that in the beginning, this was the language that their God spoke their world into being with. So, as a result of this, man being made in the image of God, he's endowed with that exact same creative capacity to create through speech. So it's the idea of the logos. And through this use of the logos, man in his hubris builds this tower up into heaven to see God, and God really does not like that. So rather than just striking down a tower, he makes it so all of these people can understand one another. They're all from one area, and perhaps they all speak the same language, but not anymore. And so what that means to me is that then the creative principle is bound up within these various languages. And, if one can't understand the other, if you're trying to name something, like say you're sitting on your couch and you're trying to say to the person next to you, hand me the remote, up until that point, you weren't able to create the field between you and the object which you were trying to get somebody to hand to you. I know that's a very plain example, but just trying to make the point that, there is a way in which if you can't name something, you can't really come into relationship with it. So I think it's very interesting that the creative capacity of these people was stifled by their inability to understand one another. And I think if we even think about today, take America for an example, I can't speak for other countries, but it's perfectly possible for people to be from the same geographic location, the same ethnicity, same religion, same political party, all of that, and get together and speak in a way to where we still fundamentally do not understand one another. And it can be deeper simply than language, but I think it really helps to get at this idea that language really fundamentally is an abstraction. It's always an abstraction for something that's timeless, and I know personally, every time that I try to express something in words, I'm always left with a sense of like, I didn't really really say what I wanted to. You know, I maybe was able to make the point, but it always feels like at the moment which I try to put a thought into words, something is left behind. And, you know, I think that for a lot of people, that's also true. But, you know, language is an abstraction, and maybe at an earlier point in time, the language that we spoke might have been closer to what we're trying to abstract. But over time, we've gotten further and further and further from the abstraction, from the timeless form which we're trying to express. And now we have a severely confounded language. That's
that is ever true.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a tragedy, because, you know, we can all say, you know, we speak the same language, but, you know, it's like,
Michael Dan Mussenson on YouTube says, regarding the letter, it's pronounced yod if you are posh, and yud by most Israelis. So there's an example right there.
Yeah. Well, also a lot of the Hebrew words, which I don't think this is the case with yod, but they have double pronunciations as well.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to go off on this topic of what Nick was saying, if you feel complete.
Yeah, let me look and see if I have anything else that I want to add before I turn it over. Not on this topic. No, I'd like to go through my personal experience with this card, but no, we can go ahead and riff on this for a little while if you guys like.
Well, what I wanted to say is that, and I'd love to hear your personal experience, by the way, but is that, okay. As you were speaking, I was thinking about other meanings of the tower, because, you know, like when I've pulled this card for people and they've been freaked out, I also say, you know, it can be a card of enlightenment. And what I was thinking about that is, I mean, what you were saying, Nick, the Tower of Babel story is often interpreted as what you said. But I think that there's another thing about it, which it can be read as almost like anti-establishment. Maybe that's exaggeration, or anti-religion, because I wonder
I think that gets at the same point.
If God's message, if God's message was more like, you don't need a tower to get to me, as opposed to you're full of hubris. It's not in the tower, it's not in the stone. And if you think about it, the having the language is split, it could be read as, oh, this is about chaos and confusion. But it can also be read as, there's that third thing that happens when two people can't understand each other. They need to create a third something that will help them communicate. And that's a really creative and beautiful act. You know, like that's the reason why we have art, you know, and music. Music goes beyond language, but it's to be.
Yeah, and understanding certainly can go beyond language as well. I mean, I know I've personally had the experience of just being in the presence of somebody that I feel like beyond what we're saying just understands me, just understands what I'm saying and what I'm getting at, you know, and that's something that I think everybody can relate to on some level. And I think the language aspect of this card is probably secondary to the pride aspect of building this tower up in heaven, and man's ability to think that that's wise of him to do. And that would be the anti-establishment aspect of the card.
I think that hold on, there was one other thought that just flew out of my head. But I think that it could be seen, I'm looking at it more of a benevolent God here, which is like,
well, it's certainly destruction for reconstruction.
I just want to finish this one thought though before I forget it, which is that I don't know that it's about hubris that God is punishing. I think it was sort of like how the tower, it's enlightenment that comes in the form of great destruction, right? So it could be a gift coming in the form of what looks like a punishment, but the having people speak different languages can be a gift because of that third thing that it necessitates. So that's on a personal level, that kind of reflects my experience of just diversity and like difference and everything. So that's a point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Well, obviously, I'm not saying that diversity is bad. I mean, you know, it's great, but it's also inevitable. I'm not saying we should all speak one tongue. It's just it's a symbolic metaphor. So the personal experience that I would attach to this card is that, and you know, this may sound a little silly. I don't know. It was a big turning point in my life personally. So as I've mentioned before, you know, I've played music most of my life, and it's always been a bit of a dream of mine to be a musician as a way of supporting myself. And, you know, I've been able to do that somewhat, but not in the way that I really wish that I could, not in a way that was working for me, and also in a way that was really impacting others. You know, first and foremost, I really wanted to, you know, make my music have some effect for people and have meaning for people, as well as, you know, something that could sustain me and not just be some huge ego trip. And I played in groups for several years, and I still do casually, but probably close to a year ago, I had to make a very hard decision that I would discontinue my membership in a band with kind of music as a whole, and pursue a career. So now I'm in school, and you know, I'm pursuing a career in psychology and all of that good stuff. But it was essentially a process of having to break down something, having to destroy something that I love dearly. You know, it was a pattern that was just something that's so near and dear to me, and something that ultimately I had to come to realize wasn't really serving my life, my personal growth. It was kind of a boy's dream. And, you know, I had to dismantle that and replace it with something else that I feel like will, in the long run, be more meaningful, something that will usher in an era of adulthood for myself. And, you know, that was really, really difficult. So I know that might sound kind of plain for other people who've maybe had more difficult experiences, but that was inwardly a very tough thing for me to have to do. And, you know, I'll always have a casual interest in music, but I had to put it on the back burner and pursue other things. And it was kind of a process of having to rip down the tower that I built for myself, but, you know, also to replace it with something else.
Good example, Nick.
Very.
Yeah.
So there's one, keep going, please, but there's just one more
That's
thing
not
that I
plain
want to
at all.
share here.
Just so, I mean, I'll put it in. That's not plain at all. That's a beautiful, powerful, intense story there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have a couple of photos prepared here that I want to share with you guys that are relevant. So let's see here. Okay. So, you know, some of these will be familiar and some will not. I hope they aren't too controversial. They are real world events. So, you know, my heart goes out to those who were affected.
Yeah,
so
I was thinking that.
This
I was
was
thinking
the
that it came up.
East
Beautiful.
Maryland Chapel earlier this year. Oddly enough, right around the time that coronavirus started, you know, there was this huge cluster of planets conjunct in Capricorn, and Mars was one of those planets. And Mars is the planet attributed to the Tower card. So there is a very, very interesting parallel. And then,
God, Nick, I love that photo with the clock in it too.
Yeah.
So symbolic. And
Yeah,
the
and
arrow pointing down.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to see too, but the cross is right in the frame as well. I couldn't get it to fit into the slide.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Very, very
That's
powerful
fantastic.
imagery.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next one, which we all know, the Twin Towers, sadly.
Mm.
And you know, those are all very, very literal tower experiences. You know, the Twin Towers at that point in time were the tallest buildings in New York City, and no more. And actually, when I was young, and that was in 2001. I was 6, 7, and my aunt, who was a police officer. She's now retired, but she also worked for the bomb squad, was called in to actually help clean these towers up. So I was fortunate enough to go to New York and see the Twin Towers before they were attacked. And then afterwards, when my aunt went to work and clean up the towers, I went to visit her. I actually have a piece of the Twin Towers here in my home. I don't know where, it's in a box somewhere, but I have a bolt. She has exit signs and all kinds of stuff, you know, very, very somber scene, but, you know, nonetheless, a tower experience.
Yeah. And I actually ate twice in the restaurant that's right at the very top there.
Really? Oh.
So that's what I have to share. We can get back on course now.
Okay. So you're
Good
going
examples. Very
You
solid.
have to discontinue your screen share.
Oh, right. Let me get back to Zoom here. Gosh, like techno deficiency is being laid bare.
Should be probably up at the top of your screen. There's a
Yes.
There's a red thing that says stop screen share.
There we go.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I want to go back and do a little plain vanilla something about the tower, and then we'll go around the room. But I want to first read Stephen Heller's 2 pages, which is pretty simple, but I want to, for the benefit of everyone that's watching on YouTube, I want them to be able to understand what this is about. This is in the baby steps formulation. We're going to get much more detailed into it later, but so here's what Stephen Heller says. I'll just read it to you. Can everybody see it on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Against the foreboding background of a midnight sky, there looms a strange tower built upon a tall, barren rock. Out of the heavens flashes a bolt of lightning, shearing off the crown at the top of the tower and sending the inhabitants thereof hurtling down. Falling drops of blood or light descend from above in the shape of the Hebrew letter Yud. The building of earthly attachments, of the false structures of mind, emotion, and body, is destroyed by the thunderbolt of the higher self. Having built upon the false security of personal and human values, human beings fall from the imagined heights of their own conceit. The Tower of Babel is destroyed because it represents an effort to reach divinity by purely human means without the relinquishment of personal ambitions and attachments. Keynote: mind and emotion, form and life, when joined together, generate implacable conflict that can be resolved only by raising consciousness to a level superior to both, thus uniting the eternal thesis and antithesis in a higher synthesis. And I think that statement kind of sums up what I was trying to get to earlier when I was talking about the 5th stage of consciousness. Motto: except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Meditation: I am willing to sacrifice all in order to attain to the objective of my great journey. If it is the will of my Father to strike down everything I have built in my life, may he do so and do it swiftly. I shall be free of attachment to anything or anyone. I love all, but I shall be ready to part from all when ordered to do so by the Lord of Fire. I realize that by being attached to the constructs of my personality, I shall never be able to soar into the heavens. May all that needs to be destroyed in me be destroyed and blotted out forever. Thus I shall rejoice with the voice of thunder and exult with the flash of lightning. So mote it always be. I don't quite understand
Mote
what
it
that.
be. So mote it be usually is like saying let it be done. It's like saying amen in magic.
Okay, all right, fine. We'll accept it. We'll accept that description.
It comes from
Sorry.
it comes from the mode in God's eye.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
All right. Okay. All right. So one thing that this alluded to, but it didn't quite say, Frank, completely. But let me. Nick was talking about the Old Testament, but I want to just mention a couple of passages from the New Testament. One is Luke 14:11. He who exalts himself will be abased, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And Mark 4:26 and 27, the kingdom of God is as if a man should scatter seed upon the ground and should sleep and rise night and day, and the seed should sprout and grow. He knows not how. Okay, so, and that's from Meditations on the Tarot, which is a 650-page book about the first 22 cards in the tarot, just to give you a sense of it. Okay, now before
a few other things are coming to mind that I just want to say, just kind of key words that I should have mentioned. But the person who initiates the building of the Tower of Babel is Nimrod, which is a modern pejorative expression for somebody who's kind of a fool.
Yeah.
And also Babel, they were made to be babbling fools. And I also think it's interesting, we with Heller, with all the different strands of the Kabbalah and everything like that, we're all speaking a different language too. There's so many different strands of the Kabbalah, or the way that we approach the tarot. We're all talking about the same subject matter, but we all have a different language and way of talking about it that might be incomprehensible to one or the other.
Right. Precisely why I always strive to use plain language on this YouTube channel. Exactly that. And so let's go around the room and give some others a chance to talk. Raquel, you wanted to say something?
I have a different approach than Nick's, because the Tower card was, in my personal experience, was always something that happened to me and not something that I was actually able to do, even though I know I have some structures that I had to turn down. I was never able to actually willingly do it, but to summarize what I think about the card is that in that idea that is something that external that happens to us, and happens without any type of consent, because it's something that has to happen in our lives in order to make us lose some kind of structure, because even though we are aware that some things in our lives are not good enough, there's something common that that we're not actually able to let go, and so that's the Tower experience for me, something that happens that actually puts us forcibly in a new type of path, and so after that we can it always takes me a lot of time to realize what is the blessings of the Tower experience, but eventually it does kick in. But it's a really tough experience to summarize.
Right.
The planet is having its Tower experience.
Most definitely.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And our town of Santa Cruz had its Tower experience when we had the earthquake.
Yes, indeed.
And then my home, and then everybody's lives change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that would be an example of what you're saying in terms of it happening to us, something that comes from outside.
I've got
those
any
external
number,
forces. Yeah, the external forces.
If you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy, do you want to say something here? You need to unmute. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I think similar to what everyone else has said about the Tower card. It's a force that happens in our lives forces us to reconstruct how we see ourselves. In some ways, we are the Tower, and I think the crown probably has some symbolism of our relationship to ourselves, or our relationship to the idea of ourselves. And when that gets reconstructed, we often feel a lot of pain because we've learned how to live the game of life through the way that we've constructed ourselves and forcing ourselves to, like when the sandcastle gets knocked over, people can get pissed off with themselves and with the circumstance.
Yeah.
And they have to rebuild themselves back up again. And I guess essentially that external, what can seem external can sometimes be by design, sort of force us to engage with ourselves in a way that's different than the way that we have been.
Something we didn't ask for.
Right.
Yes.
Something we didn't ask for. Excellent point.
I think in some cases, maybe we have asked for it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We keep repeating the same sort of behaviors, and some aspect of ourselves that is wiser and knows better forces that moment upon us.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really good point, Jimmy, because coming after the devil, where we talked about chains and bonds, no matter how loose, there's an emancipation quality that occurs when it all comes down. Like
Yes,
freedom.
I can't stop myself from thinking of the inscription over Jung's home, which is something like, called or uncalled, God will be present.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know,
Powerful message, Jimmy.
You know what it also makes me think of is the concept. I was thinking as Colleen was sharing about the planet is having a tower moment. I actually agree with that, but I was just thinking about how also when Skip talks about the next stage of consciousness and how people talk about the age of Aquarius and debate whether it's occurred yet or not, is that I think these things are happening in cycles all the time. But when it happens in our lifetime, it feels like it's the only one, you know what I mean? Because that's the cycle for us. But I think it's continuing. And since we're talking about psychological development, what I was wondering it might mean, because we're talking about the phallic nature of the tower and how the next card is, you know, depending on your interpretation, but in my Rider-Waite example, the character has breasts and looks female, you know, is like, we start out too yin with the Fool, you know, to the, we might feel free, but there's also a naivete in that yinness, right? And then the masculine nature grows, you know, as the Tower, and maybe that's part of it. It's about going to extremes, and then you have to tear that down and then build again so you can integrate. And to me, that's what's happening in our country. And now we have, you know, Kamala as the vice president. So I had one other thought just to tie it in and bring it back to the actual image of the card. Yeah, basically just that, like getting too big for our britches and needing some other element to soften things. And then I was reminded, this is sort of tangential, but about like a friend told me once about Christianity and the idea of being reborn, that she didn't really believe in God. So we're trying to resolve these ideas. And she was saying, maybe it's about being reborn to every moment, you know, that we make mistakes and then we get to get up again. That's our resurrection. And similarly with Buddhism, you know, the Buddha went to extremes of total self-denial, total indulgence to total self-denial before coming to that middle part. So yeah, for me, the Tower means something to do with that, at least with what I see going on in my society, a masculine and feminine extreme.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come back to Jordan and Nicole at the end of this round because they both have images to share. But let's go to Annabelle. Do you have something you wanted to share about the?
Yeah, I've had some very visceral experiences of the tower. Just a couple of weeks ago, it was before one of these sessions and I spoke about it, I had to have my dog have a lethal injection. And it was because he had attacked some people and he was 15 years old and the vet discussed that with me. And it's been a very hard thing to adjust to. That was on the 16th, it was a Monday. And a few nights later on the 19th, I had a dream and I'm gonna try to show you the drawing that I did of it. And it was a tower. So there's a little tiny village in the bottom of the picture. And then the tower is extremely tall. And the little village is in the middle of the desert. I have a lot of family in Texas. I spent last Christmas in New Mexico. It was a very familiar landscape. The number of units in that tower that I drew turned out to be 71. And the idea was that it was a museum. That's what I was told in the dream. A museum for individual people to visit. So only one person would fit in each one of those places. And would see one work of art and had a window. And the windows faced in many different directions. And I was on a journey driving into the town, meeting someone who was balefully sad because he had been employed to work in this museum and now the museum may never be finished. And I was going to continue on my journey past. That was on the 19th. So the dog died on the 16th. The dream was on the 19th. On the 26th, I lost my vision in one eye. And I'm a writer, I read, I publish books, I edit text for my living. And I was in and out of the ER 3 times. I rode in an ambulance for the first time in my life. And my vision was saved. And I'm right in between 2 operations now. One was last Sunday, and the next one, which was my right eye, and my left eye will be done on Wednesday. So it's really made me see very closely what's what. And I am farsighted. The condition that I have is a very rare one, and it's only for far-sighted people. And there are many, so I'm just touching on a few points here. Many things about the dream have to do with farsightedness, have to do with being way up high and looking out. And of course, the image, I have that Italian kind of modified Marseille deck, and those yuds are little round pellets, and there are 37 of them surrounding the tower, very much like a chess set. But my impression, and I've been studying that card since the dream especially. So like the chess set castle, the top is tilted and then there's that, you know, kind of excrescence. So that's my personal experience at the moment so far.
Wow.
Expecting more change.
Yeah,
That's powerful.
We're all in it in some way, sadly. So Rhea, did you have something that you wanted to share? I don't know if she's right there or not. Okay, perhaps we'll come back to Rhea then. Okay, let's go to Jordan and give him a chance to talk about his card, which is quite interesting. And then I'm going to show you a card in formation. It's not finalized by Nicole, which is quite interesting as well. A completely different perspective. But are you seeing your card now,
I
Jordan?
am. Thank you. Thank you, Skip. This is my Tower card from Tarot in the Land of Mysterium, published by Schiffer Publications in 2011. And a quick little background, that's an image of the Fool writing in on an abstraction of the Egyptian hieroglyph for fabric, which
Can you
is...
make it bigger, Jordan?
Oh, I can do that. I can do that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Oh, wonderful.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. So the four golden pillars on the common golden base, the Egyptian hieroglyph for fabric is 4 pairs of wheat stalks that are paired leaning together on a common ground. And that's the symbol for fabric. So to me, the Fool, that's where the Fool lives in a sense in this deck. So the Fool is flying in, and it's the lightning strike is the voice of truth. And as you see the lightning going down through and coming out, also coming up, the fire going up, because lightning actually, the last leg of lightning strikes from the ground to meet up. And then you see this character over on the left, upside down, and that's a half image of the Chariot character in this card. So what I'd like to do is just read this first page. It's a short paragraph page from the book, because the companion book that goes with it, because it deals directly with self-actualization and the individuation of an inner self coming into being. So with that little background, I'll go into this. The Tower. It is the middle of the night in Mysterium. The Fool feels a big dream and hops on fabric to fly back to the castle. The castle had been kept fresh, but the Fool left it untended. The castle had grown into the tower. The tower grew higher and higher. It began to have only hoarded gold and riches and idle hands inside. Wild and uninvited partygoers filled the top. This angered the Fool. This is unfitting for my castle, the Fool said. The Fool's voice became a big lightning bolt of truth and blasted the whole structure to rubble. Everything changed. The castle was gone. As the smoke cleared, a small child in a green meadow appeared where the castle once was. It then felt like daytime in his dream, and daytime in the dream. Moving nearer, the child began asking the Fool questions about life and death and everything in the universe. The Fool is patient and attentive and warms to the child, answering each and every question. The Fool feels in the dream, I feel I know all the answers to this child's questions of everything. The child becomes silent at this dream thought. The child's sudden silence startles the Fool. Politely, the Fool asks, who are you? The child's eyes glimmer brightly with a smile, saying, I am you, only new. And that's how I intro the Tower.
Okay.
And so that's David coming out of Michelangelo in a way. So the chariot there, which is harnessed energies coming out at the bottom, is then the new life that's emerging from this voice of truth at the same time that this is being destroyed. So you have, in a sense, a double action, the destruction, but then in the destruction, the lightning goes out to the right and creates another character so that it continues forward.
You said there's a chariot in this image somewhere?
The upside down person
Bottom right.
there, that's the
Oh,
chariot character from my deck.
Oh, cool.
The charioteer that is then emerging from the tip of the lightning that comes out of the middle, that kind of parapet, lower walk area at the base. And also you see the tower is sat on an upside down crown of sorts.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. You know what? This is really interesting to me, knowing that you're also an architect. I'm
Thank
curious.
you. Go into that. I mean, clarify, would you?
Well, I don't know. I'm curious what you think about it, because I mean, obviously, being an architect is a strong part of your identity. You know, we're talking about a work of architecture being destroyed. So what that meant
Well,
for you.
and one of the pages in any construction document said is the demolition plan. So it's like what we're going to take out. So
Yeah.
it's very, very, you know, I'm in, it's a good point actually, but I'm even in the creative process when I'm architecture, I mean, you have your floor plan, but prior to that, you have your demolition plan. So there's mathematical dimensioned destruction, surgical
Yeah.
even.
Well, Jordan, I have a question.
Yes.
I noticed that in the rider card, the tower is built on rotting wood. And I wondered if there was, if you built that into your design at all. I mean, but this tower is not, it's not built on very firm ground to begin with. It was bound to happen.
In the Rider Waite, you mean?
Yeah,
Uh-huh. Oh,
that's
Just
a wooden,
looking.
it's built on wood. It's
And
rotting.
it's interesting you say that, because rather than the solid ground, I put it on the upside down crown as if royalty has been discarded. It was planted in the ground in my tower card, whereas these are on the rotted piles or rotted pylons on
Yeah.
rotted ground. But I did not put it on the rotted ground. I put it on the upside down crown, which would be a shell, almost like chaff is shed from wheat, that the crown had been shed to be the foundation. So building on that first stage, for example, of individuation,
Oh,
but then the tower goes, and then the small child comes and I'm you, only new. And then that's the oak tree coming out of the acorn of self.
It's really interesting too. One thing with the Bota deck that they mention, which is this is a Kabbalistic concept as well, is that they make it very clear by doing the marks in the stone indicating that the tower is built of individual stones, that it's a reference to the idea of Eben. And in the Kabbalah, it's Eben is a word that means stone, but it also means Ab, A-B, being the father, and Ben being the son, unified into one thing, which also means the stone. Obvious analogies can be made to alchemy and all of that, but you know, it's the idea of these two forces coming together.
That's a wonderful point too, because then even the notion of a cornerstone of self, having something to solidly brace against in your life, to then move yourself forward is important. And that Aben or is expressing that concept.
you know,
And I didn't use any yuds or yods. I basically just simply have the stone Tetris pieces that were, you know, being blown off. This card was somewhat Rider Waite homage-ish, but I took out most of the astrology and the psychology intentionally, just to run the path through tarot voice in the first person and story, to tell it the same story, but to tell it that way.
Okay, so now we're going to see one that is not Rider Waite. Homage-ish.
And in progress. This is a real treat here with
right, and
Nicole's
so this
card.
is Nicole's card. Are you ready, Nicole?
Yes, yes.
Okay, here we go. Nicole is
Yeah,
sharing.
I've got,
Mm.
I've
Oh,
got
beautiful.
Oh,
Oh my
wow.
goodness.
yeah. Look
Turn my
at
computer
that.
upside down to see what it was like originally.
It looks
You're gonna
like
have to wait
Dante.
for all of us to quiet down before you can talk about it.
Yeah, it looks
was
like Dante's
Tower of
Inferno.
Babel.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Look
it was taken from an artwork done by Bruegel, I think, of the Tower of Babel. That was
Mhm.
how it first
Yeah, it's by
started.
Bruegel. That cross section is by Bruegel.
It's
And then I put it on like a dystopian and turned it upside down. I don't know, like I'm just, because of postmodernism, how everything's fragmented, and then the whole idea was to sort of bring it around.
It looks very much like at least the form at the top in the best way. It looks very much like Dante's I think 9 layers of hell.
Mm-hmm.
Really? I've never
Right,
seen
It
it.
does.
Okay.
That
Yeah,
very
it
definitely.
does. It really does.
Yeah. And
Which part
the
you-
bottom
Oh.
sticks. It's just, it was taken from a photo that I took around here of a pile of sticks.
Oh, not the river
So I-
Styx. Oh, interesting.
I thought you meant the band.
And then the red was the red dots were COVID, the COVID thing, the COVID, you know, the
They're definitely causing us to fall down
then
right now.
yeah, and then the burning match went in for some reason. I don't know. I just thought it was symbolically linking somehow, and you know, I just got into this whole idea of this dystopia, and it's I guess the narrative for me is man and nature. You know, it's like it's a battle between the man-made tower and how nature takes its course with it, you know, and I got really activated seeing that Notre Dame image that you put up, because what came up was what I think's happening is that the energy gets created before the image, and so this energy is present of the tower in society and culture, if you like, and then we see it in actuality, in like we all see the images of Notre Dame and the Twin Towers, and then it starts to work. It starts to get constellated in us, and so we create. And maybe that's where the fifth element comes in. Oh, I don't know, but like, yeah, I'm just, anyone, what are other people's thoughts?
Tell me
I think
about
what you're
that.
saying is definitely true. I mean, all of this stuff, I only point to those external events because I think, just like in previous weeks, how I was talking about the thing with Gnosticism last week and everything, anytime I talk about anything like that, it's always an analogy for an inner process. And I just operate on the assumption that everybody agrees that anything that we see outside of ourselves is really just a metaphor for something that's happening within everybody as well.
Yes, yes.
That reminds me also of, and I was holding off on, I can hold off on part of it, but about the Rapunzel story.
Yes, let's wait to get into that until we have the card up.
Yeah, no, the reason that I bring it up right now is because I can save most of my point with that, but it had to do with what Nick was saying, like the external versus the internal, and like public and private and all that. But actually on this card, my subconscious, when I see those COVID things, I think of blotches of menstrual blood, you know,
Yeah.
and the how with this, the yods, or the description that Skip read was about,
It's
could
the
be
lifeblood.
Yeah, it could be light, but it could be blood too. So yeah, I'm not sure what it means yet, but in your drawing, I see the presence of the feminine, and wonder how that's going to be incorporated later into this. Like,
Dang, that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I also see
subconscious.
another symbol of feminine that's just right next to the number 16, and wherever it's coming out from the tower, even though it's upside down, it looks like a rose.
You mean if
Looks like a what?
A
rose.
rose.
A rose.
It looks like a rose to me. Like it's kind of like even though it's at the bottom of the card, it looks like a rose.
Oh, I like that.
No pressure, Nicole, but now you have to live up to all these elements that we're seeing in here.
Nicole, can you speak to the little like baby tower vignette you have in the bottom left? It's almost like you had a thought form diagram.
Well, what it was what I do is I do draw a card to lead me into this card. So
oh, okay.
That card was, I think it was the 6 of Wands.
I was
I
going to say
decided
6
to
of Wands.
Pardon?
Yeah.
I was going to say that it looked like the 6 of Wands.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it was the horse. It was the Rider-Waite deck, but I thought I'd do it without the rider. I'm just going to put the wands and the horse and the saddle with no rider, because I think what I really get instinctively about this next, where we're at, like in the world, is that it's the death of the hero. Like so there's no rider on the horse. He's not coming to save you. We've all got to like. So that's a really strong. It was really, when I pulled that card, I was like, oh God, it's just like, it's so. Yeah, I just get really strong threads going into it deeper, and I love the symbol of the crown. I think I might include that as well somehow.
I think it's really interesting that you say there's no rider on the horse, because that, on the one hand, it could be there's no hero, but it also could be there's none of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are there either.
Mm-hmm. Well, and taking the person off the horse, all the knights are standing, and a horse's mode is to charge. So it removes those horse shackles in a way.
Yeah.
Wow, thanks everyone. That's awesome.
Yeah. Now this is
That's a powerful image, Nicole. Thank you for sharing the progress.
Not strictly a tower.
Whoa.
But I want to share this image with you because of what the name of this boat. Okay.
Never enough.
This is a 64-foot
low ghost
yacht. And
so big.
notice it's riderless. There's not a human being on it, and you can never get to heaven.
Yeah.
Even if you get another boat. I mean,
yeah,
we think we can have happiness if we get a bigger boat, but that's not true.
Yeah, you don't ever see a U-Haul behind a hearse. You can't take it with you, you know.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was
thank you.
That was terrific.
That was stunning.
And, and Rhea, did you want to say something to us about your perspective of the?
No, not at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. And Colleen, did you want to say anything more? You're muted at the moment. Colleen, you're muted. We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you, Colleen.
There you go.
There we go. I'm sorry. Oh, Nicole, it's such a beautiful drawing. It's so nice. Thank you. Thank you. I think that looking at it, that the tower is bound to collapse. You know, it's so top heavy, and it has such a stellar is the word that comes up for me. You know, the top on it is like something that's prepared to go out of this world. In terms of hubris, thinking, you know, that it can just go and go and go and go, but it's bound to collapse. There's just not enough foundation there to hold it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Now, in order to give due credit to the fifth tarot, and thank you to Patricia for bringing this to my attention, this deck. I want to share their card, and it's a little bit different. Can you see this card?
Mm-hmm.
And do you see what's different about it?
Oh my gosh. Is the pyramid, okay, first of all, it looks like the person is getting the lightning bolt. However, now that I look at it, and I'm glad you pointed this out, Skip, because I never saw this before, is that it looks like the person is inside the tower.
Precisely.
And the lightning's coming inside to strike the person in the tower, not the tower itself.
Right. Precisely. That it's inside the tower. Okay, so I want to read their description of this because it also comes up in the Meditations on the Tarot book, and it's a pretty succinct discussion. I mean, we go all over the place when we chat, but let me just read this. On the tree of life, on the path from Netzach to Hod, our victory to splendor is the tower, with a departure from traditional tarot decks. This perspective of the image comes from inside the tower, where the walls are beginning to crumble and fall. The tower walls are symbolic of the walls we build around ourselves, the emotional blocks and spiritual barricades that are self-imposed. The fire at the base indicates transformation and cleansing. The walls break down to reveal a figure inside a crystal pyramid. As we free ourselves from the prisons of our own making, our true essence as a crystalline being emerges. A bolt of lightning strikes the head of the figure, symbolizing a moment of enlightenment. We glimpse the starry night sky through the cracks, suggesting our connection to cosmic consciousness. The star symbol for the tower card is the universal law of change. Upheaval and illumination are key to the energy of change that comes with the tower. When our desires are burned in the fire of truth, we can see through the illusions of the third dimensional reality. In a larger picture, we are let me make this larger. Speaking of larger, it's quite beautiful when you make it larger. And I've lost my place. Okay. I'll just start where I am. When our desires are burned in the fire of truth, we can see through the illusions of the third dimensional reality. In a larger picture, we are multidimensional beings in a physical body experiencing life on this plane. Our crystalline form and the vehicle that transports us between what we call realities is viewed by many as a pyramid. As we remember that we are the crystalline pyramid, we can facilitate change in the world. The true power of the pyramid lies not at the top, but at the base. As more people awaken to the change that is occurring in the collective consciousness at this time, we are able to break down the illusion of the elite few at the top of the pyramid. This choice is ours now. The starry skies show our divine connection to the universe and to the principle as within, as without. You are a holographic piece of the divine. In the previous two cards, Death and Shadow, the choice was made to release old patterns and thoughts. In the tower, the walls of the old paradigm are coming down. The starry skies hint at the next card, the star, where the promise and hope of new possibilities arise. Every positive aspect of the divine is seen in the expanse of the tower sky. We have dealt with our past, and unless we allow the old paradigm to lead us again, the freedom, and I think that's a very important phrase, we have dealt with our past, and unless we allow the old paradigm to lead us again, the freedom we sought truly becomes our reality. In all the parts of our life where the ultimate has not yet been realized, the card asks us to learn from the minor upheavals and move toward greater understanding. The flashes of insight that come with this card enable us to see through the surface to the deeper spiritual understanding that lies beneath. The light that comes from such realizations brings forth cosmic energies and higher vibrations that facilitate change and transformation. When widely shared through any form of communication, The high vibrations do not allow lower vibrations to be present. When the door is opened in a darkened room, light enters and the room is no longer dark. Likewise, the tower creates openings for illumination to occur and facilitate positive change. As in Leonard Cohen's, the cracks are where the light gets in, right?
I love that.
At the moment of this writing, there was a message of Patricia Cota Robles, co-founder of the New Age study of humanity's purpose, that was pertaining to a new influx of energies streaming to the earth at this time. These energies help cleanse the energies of the old paradigm. And in my view, we represent those energies here. Her message instructs us to be strong in love and peace and awaken to the truth. Being open to the changes at hand and awakening to the truth is the key to this card. When the illumined mind chooses the divine path, the crystal pyramid that we are fully manifests. As all is connected, our transformation assists in bringing about the needed change in the world and moves the collective consciousness toward more enlightened states of being. This is seen in the capstone of the pyramid, which seems to frame the higher chakras of the figure. Here, the capstone represents the higher aspirations, the higher goals for the greater good. Like the icing on the cake, the capstone is the culmination atop the pyramid and is itself a pyramid within the pyramid. Now, she also adds here, they also add a poem by Richard Lovelace, which is to Alhia from prison. And here's what he said. Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. Minds innocent and quiet take that for an hermitage. If I have freedom in my love and in my soul am free, angels alone that soar above enjoy such liberty. And I'm not going to read the divinatory meaning, but I thought that was quite beautiful rendition.
Yeah, I have something I want to share with you, and I think that you will be able to use this idea for your fifth tarot, or for your idea of the fifth suit here.
Okay.
So it's definitely weird, definitely esoteric, but I did a little study one day on the mathematics of a 5-pointed star. And the thing that I was trying to get down was the connection between a 5-pointed star and a pyramid. And so, right, if you take a pyramid like you see here at the bottom, and you draw Plato's, I think he calls it the divided line, you get almost the exact proportions of the pyramid by making an undivided line, like the 1 to the 1.618, like, you know, all of the pi ratio stuff. And so what's interesting is that when you have this 5-pointed star, if you flip it upside down and you take and draw a line from the top point here through the cross section, you have exactly a pyramid, the exact proportions of the pyramid here. And yeah, it's really interesting because, you know, the pyramid, it's 4 sides, it's got 4 points, but it's united by a 5th point in the top. And I imagine that's why they included it in that card, because it's really like, you know, you could think of it as the 4 points, 4 directions, 4 elements, and all of that, but it's unified by this 5th thing, and it's revealed in the 5-pointed star. I mean, you wouldn't think that this 4-pointed object would be hidden within a 5-pointed object, but it is.
Wow.
That's really cool, Nick.
That's pretty mind-blowing what you just said.
One thing, an old architectural principle in sacred architecture as related to self, is the notion that pyramids are themselves their own foundation. So even in that card, the capstone is the corner. If you go back to that card, Skip, please.
Okay.
that capstone has the intersection at the heart when you come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's actually interesting, and so if I look at that as a two-dimensional spearhead, flat plate, rather than, and that, it's interesting to me, it's actually not a pyramid, it's a tetrahedron. It has four sides, not four and a bottom, because if you look at the back, the base of that is triangular.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is actually a stronger shape, because 3 is the first number of self-supporting structure, 3 is the number of beauty. But then you get the 4 sides, base, and 3 planes vertically at an angle. But then that's 4. But then the 5th element is that self within that tetrahedron. So, but I thought that was interesting, that pyramids are themselves their own foundation. And then that capstone above, at the heart and above, is then set on the body. So then you are your own foundation, supported by the earth.
Triangles are also, I read it in a book, and I don't know if I'm going to explain it the right way, but there's also male and female in triangles, because if you, this is the part where I'm going to try to recreate what I read, but I don't, someone help. So like there's the phallic, right? Like coming to a point or penetrating, and then there's the open, what's the opposite of phallic? We don't have a word.
Yoniverse.
Feminine, yoniverse, whatever. That's all. I have something to say about Rapunzel.
The blade and the chalice.
There you go. The blade and the chalice.
I would say
the blade and the chalice, or sword and scabbard.
I would say cavernous.
Yeah.
Nick, could you send me a copy of your 5-pointed star? I'd like to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and also the triangle, male, upside down, female. Also the 5-pointed star. If you have the 2 points up, that's female. If you have the 2 points down, that's male.
Yeah. So both are needed once again. So, which brings me to Rapunzel. So, so what I wanted to say is that, no, seriously, because
no, that's good segue.
For the YouTube audience, when we had our meeting before that is not live streamed, we were, kind of spitballing and stuff. And Nick was saying how he was talking about myths, and then thinking, what else could we talk about that wouldn't be a myth that talks about a tower? And I said, well, Rapunzel, because I was thinking of all the fairy tales I've heard growing up about princesses and towers. Often it's usually a woman in a tower. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna just stick with that, because it felt like I was trying to force it. I wasn't ready, but I thought about it, and I think I came up with something. So for anyone who's watching in the YouTube audience, what I'm referring to is I did look it up on Wikipedia, and then I thought from my memory of watching Fairy Tale Theater as a kid, which is a show that was on HBO about retelling fairy tales. So so the story basically goes, there's a woman who was born to 2 poor people who, when her mother was pregnant with her, the husband went out to go find food for her and ended up stealing Rapunzel, which is a vegetable of some kind. I think it's a radish of some kind, from this other home that was like a rich home. And it ended up being that who he stole from was some type of witch character, right? Who was going to punish him unless the deal that they made was that he would give her she would allow him to take the Rapunzel to feed his starving wife if they gave her the child after the child was born. So it was sort of an unfair deal to begin with, but he took it to survive and everything. And then anyway, so Rapunzel goes to, there's the picture. So Rapunzel basically grows up, she doesn't know her parents, but she lives with this woman as her mother. And she has very long hair, and there's no way to get out of the tower except by Rapunzel's hair. So the mother, who she thinks is her mother, climbs her hair in the morning and visits her and feeds her and all that, and then climbs down. Now, at a certain point, so she's not allowed to leave the tower, obviously. And at a certain point, I think she's singing, the story was told by the Grimm's brothers, but it evolved. So it came from earlier stories. You can look it up on your own. But she was singing, and then a hunter comes by and hears her voice, and it's so beautiful, and he convinces her to let down her hair, and he climbs it, and they fall in love, yada yada. One thing leads to another. Anyway, this is all done in secret, and then somehow, depending on which story you hear, somehow they're found out. And in one, it's when Rapunzel is like, oh, she says something stupid that basically lets her mother know that she's pregnant. That's not how I remember the story, but whatever. So what ends up happening is her mother cuts her hair. The prince falls from the tower and is blinded by it, according to the story I read from Fairy Tale Theater, which is also referenced in the Wikipedia article. And she ends up being cast out. She's pregnant, but she's cast out. She wanders the desert as a single mom in the desert. And then he's blind and he's lost. And he eventually does find her in the Fairy Tale Theater version, and they have a family that is complete. So what I was thinking about this, so you could analyze it from like a feminist point of view, that this is about her sexuality being repressed. And then in order to individuate, she needs to grow from a child to a woman. And that's part of your sexual awakening, which I think is that's part of it. But on a more universal and genderless level, I think what it's representing is psychological individuation. And the reason that a woman is being used to tell the story as a main character instead of a man has to do with the yin and yang of what is political or outward or a social thing, and what is an inward developmental within the body type, like personal experience. And I think that a woman is being used to tell that story because of, you know, the original tower has to do with the man's hubris in the world, you know, hierarchy. But this one has to do with the personal. So I think what it means is, and what my experience of this is that all of us, when we grow up, our first sort of trauma, if you will, is like being separated from the mother just through birth, right? And they say that is traumatic. That's our first trauma. Then we go through other traumas, but one of those can be moving from adolescence to adulthood, where you individuate from your family, where you find what makes me different from the people I share my genetics with. So so one of the interpretations on Wikipedia has to do with having an overprotective parent who doesn't want you to individuate. I think that Rapunzel represents one part of the psyche, which is the youth. That's the feminine. It's just youth that has to join with the masculine. What is that? Animus or anima? Animus.
It would be animus in that situation.
This character has to find her opposite in order to be a complete individual psychologically, has to integrate the masculine and feminine to become an individual. So my experience of that, without getting like all the details, but I definitely have experience in my family of being the youngest child and trying to individuate and sort of still being infantilized as an adult. And how when I behave as an adult, like I could say something that's not mean, but just directive. Like if I'm in a car with one of my family members saying where we're going, and it'll be like, don't talk down to me. Don't like I'm sassing someone. And that's incredibly frustrating because I'm just behaving as an adult, but it's taboo within the family structure for me to do that. So there's all sorts of ways within which that plays out to various degrees of function or dysfunction. But I think my personal experience and conclusion is also universal, you know?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you bring up the animus comment, and you know, without going too far into Jungian terms, I guess I'll have to momentarily, but I'll try to ground it as best I can. But I think that this is the case for both anima and animus, that they always develop as a result of the relationship with the parent. So in the case of a man, my anima image would always develop out of my relationship with my mother, and it, you know, it's part of the task of the person in individuation to wrest that image from the parent. And in this particular fairy tale, it seems very much like the father is under the spell of the witch, and the woman has to pull her anima out of this spell and claim it for herself.
Yeah.
as it's related to the father and the young man and the story. I don't have a great grasp of the story, but that seems to be what it's indicating to me.
Let me give you a grasp of the story here. So
Okay.
what we're looking at here is the Tower card from the Tarot of the Divine, and this is the story that goes with it.
Actually, really quickly before you do that, thank you, Samantha, because while you were going through that, I had never thought about this before, but in so many fairy tales, not the damsel in distress, just the damsel in the tower is a symbol of the sacred feminine within the vessel of the masculine structure. So thank you, because I hadn't really ever, that just simple connection, but that sacred feminine within.
I hadn't thought of that either. That's cool.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to read this short story. It's one page. There once was a poor couple who dearly wanted a child. When the woman became pregnant, she was filled with an insatiable craving for the leaves of her neighbor's Rapunzel plant. Unfortunately, their neighbor was a witch, so the husband was too scared to ask for some. But his wife soon became sick and began to die for want of the plant. So her husband silently scaled the witch's garden wall and stole some Rapunzel. But before he could make his escape, the witch caught him. The witch promised to give the man all the Rapunzel his wife wanted, but in exchange, they would have to give the newborn to her. The terrified man agreed, and 9 months later, a baby girl named Rapunzel was born and reluctantly given to the witch. Rapunzel grew to be very beautiful with long golden hair. When she turned 12, the witch locked her in a tower with no stairs or doors, only one room and one window. The tower was surrounded by thorns. To visit the girl, the witch stood at the base of the tower and shouted up to Rapunzel to let down her hair so that she could climb up the long tresses. One day, a prince heard Rapunzel's lovely singing and saw the witch visiting her. After the witch left, the prince ascended Rapunzel's tower. She was shocked at first, but soon they talked, fell in love, and agreed to marry. They planned Rapunzel's escape, and the prince left to get her a silk ladder. When the witch returned, she instantly detected Rapunzel's deception. Furious, she chopped off Rapunzel's hair and banished her to the wastelands. When the prince returned, the witch pushed him from the tower, where he landed in the thorns and lost both his eyes. The prince wandered blind for many years until one day he heard Rapunzel's beautiful singing. He followed her voice and they were reunited. Rapunzel cried happy tears, some of which fell over his eyes, and his vision was restored. They returned to his kingdom and lived happily ever after. Isn't that sweet?
I've never been told such a heteronormative story.
Isn't that sweet?
I love that.
Priceless.
It is so sweet. Like I've never oh my God, because think about it though, like she needed him and he needed her. And I was just thinking about him, what does him being blind mean? Like he can't see. It's sort of like directionless masculinity. Like if it doesn't have a direction, you're lost.
Yeah. Right, and then he's blind because he can't see his mother anima.
And then he becomes the tower. At that point, he is the tower then, because the only thing vision-wise is within.
And the crying part, though, it's sort of, okay, now this is like very stereotypical masculine and feminine, but I don't care because it's symbolic and I think it's pretty, is that she's able to express, she's able to cry and feel the emotion. And at least I've heard at least a lot of men in my father's generation say, oh, like the woman helps him with that. Like maybe he doesn't have access to that emotion. And part of what is, I'm told, beautiful by straight men who admire women is like, oh, they can cry and express and they're soft and all those feminine like archetypes. And So I think that's related too. Like the only way he can see and be complete and all that is by her expressing her emotions.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
interesting, because I consider tears to be sacred adornments.
You should watch the
Yeah,
Fairy
that really
Tale Theater one, because when her tears fall, they do like a computer animation. It's from the 70s or 80s, so it's like not like today's, but they almost look like diamonds falling from her eyes. It's really pretty.
Cool.
Okay, so we have some other tower cards to consider, and they're all quite beautiful and different. And so I'm going to share them. The next one is from the She-Wolf deck, and Devany Wolfe often challenges us with evocative images. And so here she is.
Disappointed. No, I just mean there's no naked ladies in this one. This is the first one I've seen without that.
Don't speak too quick.
It's still pretty.
Right.
See any.
So she calls this the will of Mars. Okay. And so she says this is Mars, Aries, Scorpio. Keys: destruction, revolution, transmutation, inner void, breakdown, and breakthrough. Artwork illumination. A colorful, busy, rather visually overwhelming tower is lit ablaze by the eye of Horus, god of the sky. The intense coloration and pattern arrangement of the tower represents the buildup of internal identities and narratives that we carry around until the will of Mars decides it's time to obliterate it all. Light, the light side. The tower is the internal counterpart of the death card. Death equals external change, and the will of Mars is what occurs when something within our core is triggered, leading to a cascade, a veritable domino effect of destruction. Mars is combative by nature, and so there is an element of conflict, of resistance within the process of the tower crumbling. As mentioned, the tower itself represents our mounting identities and narratives about the I and what it means. So all of this leads to rather eye-opening time of stripping away things about the I that we have thus far clung to. When we receive this card, likely something has occurred that has triggered the collapse of our identity, or perhaps also our worldview. This can be a scary time, especially if we have issues with control. We can easily go into a crisis of identity. For a time, it can seem that there is nothing to cling to, nothing makes sense. But what is afforded at the end of the process, beyond the rubble, is ourselves, a much more in tune, aligned, harmonious I, whose internal narratives are no longer muddled by the restrictions of the past. This card is asking us to face the reality and trust the process. Shadow. The tarot is an amazing tool because it helps us to be aware of the processes that are taking place, which otherwise may remain vague and nameless. The shadow aspect of the will of Mars is that we don't know what process is occurring, and we panic. We feel triggered. The pin comes loose, the notions of self begin to unravel, and we go straight into fear. The fear leads to destruction and compounds upon itself. When we undo ourselves or become undone, there is a fear that we will lose the I, or our minds. If we blindly destroy because we are in a panic, we may inadvertently validate this fear and say, see, I did lose it. It becomes a vicious cycle. Awareness is key. A shift in identity is not the end of the world, nor is it the end of us. Mantra: I rise from the rubble of old identities to become what I am meant to be. And so I guess I could make this a little bit bigger so you can see it a little bit better. But boy, I really like the way she wrote that. Personally.
Yeah, I do too, and I love that she's also then connected that Eye of Horus into that lightning strike at the top. It's providing two functions, and that Eye of Horus, I think I'd shown the picture before, is cross section through the brain where you see the pituitary, the pineal gland, and the thalamus. That is actually that structure of that Eye of Horus up top, which is that center brain.
Yeah.
No,
So,
that's
this
just beautiful.
is really interesting. What's just come through is like, I was looking at the card, sorry to interrupt, but I just think that this card really represents the exaltation of the masculine to bring us into a higher consciousness.
That's a good point. It is, because
how women.
I definitely don't think it's disparaging of the masculine. I mean, I understand that interpretation, but I mean, I definitely don't think in the same way that none of the cards are disparaging to any of the feminine components either.
Right.
There's also a bomb or grenade aspect to it, where you get the container, the vessel, and then you get the interior force that combusts to explode. Also, seed pod would, a seed pod exploded would be another example, I think. But you're right. I mean, that celebration of the masculine. I think you just said elevated. I think you used the word, but.
You know what? That's also like the male orgasm, which creates, helps co-create life. It's not just on its own, but which can be experienced also as a death, because it's ego death in that moment.
And actually the French word for orgasm is le petit mort, which is the little death. They actually call it that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well said.
I think I have an interesting quote here that gets to that. It's from a book in the Bible called Obadiah 1:4. I know it from, I heard it in a show recently, and it's a show based on the movie Fargo, but they've now turned it into a show, and it's a phenomenal show. But the third season is very biblical. There are references to the book of Job and several other books in the Bible. And anyways, there's one section in it where he kind of, the protagonist in the scene makes this prophecy, and he says, "Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down." And there's something else about exaltation, but it just made me think of what you were saying, how it's like this exalted state, but also that God in this quote is saying, essentially, if you exalt yourself like an eagle, I will strike you down.
Old Testament.
And that actually goes into the higher self piece, building yourself up to be able to shed yourself from heaven and an external heaven. And the heaven comes from within. But the whole idea of, God didn't like it very much when, almost like the magic beanstalk, the giant doesn't like it when he climbs up and invades his castle, and it's like breaking and entering, that little kid's gonna go to juvie, it's like
a divine B&E.
We digress. So anyway.
We digress. Here's another one. Now we're going to go to the Starman.
Divine B&E.
I have no appreciation for David Bowie now.
Love him.
And so everybody's seeing that.
It's radical.
It is radical.
Love it.
Yeah, that's just.
I want to go
hot.
there.
That is hot. HAWT hot.
So
it has the eye as well.
We're just showing you all the different kinds of ways that you can look at these same archetypal energies, and so
it actually repeats the eye.
Yeah, I love it.
What did you love, Nicole?
There's an astronaut floating in space on the right of the,
Major
of the
Major Tom.
Yes.
There he is.
I think that's David there.
Is that ground control? Maybe the tower is ground control.
You know, and this card again, loosely, it's not dead on, but it loosely organizes itself on the tree of life again. The two sides center, and they're not, this one's a little more loose, a little cartoonish from a structural standpoint, but it starts to kind of, in the sense that, was it the devil card before that we looked at? And I think there was definitely tree of life, and that structure is breaking down here.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the brief version. Rapid unsettling change, surrender to the flashes of insight, power in not knowing. Your world feels like it's falling apart. Strengthen your core beliefs. Reverse, delaying the inevitable. Longing for a real and lasting change. Take the risk, jump out, and free yourself from what you know. Okay, so I guess that's the short course divination version of this.
Well, that's important. I address that concept in my book of the power of the not knowing, and that it's important to be comfortable with the not knowing.
Something will emerge. So, right. Okay. So here's what he says. The tower is visualized here as a steampunk industrial edifice. It has colonized nature and is built within a Neolithic stone circle constituted from many found here in Britain. Part ancient and mysterious, part Burning Man installation. Its summit bears a transmitter bearing man's existence out into space. Beaming man's existence out into space. It represents mankind's evolution and manifest expression, his ascent from working harmoniously with nature through engineering and the organization of industry to the expansion, agility, and creativity of the radio telescope, searching deep space, extending our vision of life beyond Earth's limits. Fiery meteors are showering down, dangerously striking the tower and setting it alight, symbolizing the ultimate precarious nature of mankind. Like the dinosaurs, we too can disappear overnight. The things we've painstakingly built can be wiped out. Our culture, ideas, and the tangible evidence of it razed to the ground. On a personal level, the tower illustrates how our belief systems and ideas constructed over time to form a concrete identity and picture of reality can seemingly be catastrophically demolished. The sudden force from outside or dark secret revealed, and the story of who we are and where we're going comes crashing down. The figures leap artfully from the tower, a surrendered quality and grace to their descent, ambiguously hinting that perhaps after all they might not die, a metaphor for our capacity to surrender to the will of nature. There is great power and freedom in not knowing, in admitting the truth and overturning the conditioning that covers up the I don't knows. Without precognition, we cannot possibly know what's going to happen in the future. We can only guess at one based on assumptions. We don't know what best for ourselves and for anybody else, and for anybody else for that matter, including our children. The tower signals there will be rapid, unsettling change in your life, accompanied by a sense that things are collapsing and falling apart. Indeed, a breaking down in order for something new to happen. In the long term, this shattering of internal and external structures can be an amazing catalyst for growth and wisdom. That which isn't true is blasted clean away. Change is not disastrous and earth-shattering. Rather, it is the leap from one thing to another. All the world's a stage. You look out and see the drama unfolding, and look within to see the theater of your mind, the only constant change. Ultimately, the tower, which represents the structure and potency of the ego, is made of thoughts, so its collapse enables us to see that thoughts, when truly seen, are neither good nor bad. Reversed, delaying the onslaught and destruction, prolonging the inevitable, narrowly averting disaster. Deep down, you yearn for big change and transformation, but are frightened of the terrible inconvenience. You can handle it, time to take the leap, risk, and free yourself from the comfort of worldly attachments and securities to discover renewed meaning and purpose.
You know what this reminds me of?
What?
Too much information. Like you were talking about, no, not the description. The description was great. I just mean you were talking, Skip, about, you mentioned a few times about how we have more information available to us because of technology than
Right.
what was the fact?
It was there. We get as much in the Sunday New York Times as the person of the 16th century got in a lifetime.
Yes. And so I was born before the internet and then experienced that in my lifetime. And I guess that's the case for all of us. Yeah. And like, I relate to this. Part of my story has been in learning to individuate is like leading with the mind, leading with intellect, and learning to connect to intuition and heart and integrate those two to make the best decisions I can. And one of my negative coping mechanisms, which I think I'm dealing well with now, is over intellectualizing and over researching. What does Google say about this? You know, instead of kind of tapping into the internal. So yeah, so the tower as a metaphor for thought, like more information, more technology, more, you know, and then it all collapses and you're left with almost like you're left with no thoughts. Like people have nervous breakdowns because they get overloaded.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that I think of first, like when I say pride and hubris and all those things. All of those, I mean, even though I haven't clearly expressed it, those are all lumped in for me as being kind of part of the same problem, because I definitely have spent a lot of time thinking about the fact that we have more raw information at our disposal. We have all of the information, all of the accumulated information of mankind at our disposal all the time, but we are absolutely bankrupt when it comes to application of that knowledge and real wisdom, and how to do anything with it beyond being a fact checker. And
well, I think it's the great thing in this commentary is simply, if something happens, you just have to go with the flow until you find the next thing. And it can be very, very different. It can be very, very different.
And Skip, could you put the card back up? Because Samantha's comment was really strong about going in with heart. And there's something with the too much visual information in one sense in this card, but there's something to me that I saw right at the end. What's interesting is it's powerful and it's simple. That shadow at the bottom, and what it feels like, it's not a shadow. Maybe it's shadow of Dave Bowie, but the way the light's there, it's a different character of light. Like it's literally a shadow, and it feels like there's a campfire behind me, and my shadow is projected into the card. So that it's interesting there.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's so simple, but it's that I was going all over this card, looking at all the pieces, and then I got to that and was like, whoa. I mean, it was like that.
And it's really, I've been focused on that too. And to the left, there's an Aztec carving in the ground.
Right.
And the stone that's in front of him is like some kind of sort of like tongue-in-cheek joke, kind of like one of those you know, people dressed in a costume with like and he's looking at it like it's
that,
some kind of god, you know?
Or that, or even the glyph panels in the movie Blade, where the blood runs through, all that gold coming up in there.
Is it not Stonehenge?
I just see fire and a phallic symbol, and I also see people in the fire. There's little figures dancing in the fire. See?
Yeah, and I think that
Yeah.
the phallic symbol is actually a little bit mad, like
Oh,
he's
it's
looking angry.
Do not taunt angry phallic
Yeah.
symbol. It's like Saturday Night Live. Do not talk happy fun ball.
Right. Well,
I think you're right, Nick. I think it may not be Stonehenge, but there's very much that megalithic kind of structure feel to it.
Right. But let's bring it back down to practical life a little bit. When the crash of 2008 took place, it had huge impact on my life, and it had
about economy.
Yes.
Okay.
And so this is practical life here. Okay, I want to bring it down to real life situation, and the possibility of suicide, because the crash took place. I lost my life savings at that time, and my neighbor, who had built up a beautiful nursery business, the best nursery business in our county by far, apparently was having financial difficulties. And I had, the bad side spirit of my psyche saying, well, you ought to commit suicide, right? And I said, no, perish that thought. I want to see how this comes out, which is the right answer. My neighbor got in a rowboat, went out in the middle of the lake, and shot himself. And so the point is, you can have something crash down around you, but something new can come, and many things new can come. In 1990, I was a Marine Lieutenant Colonel on my way to possibly a star, and all of a sudden I broke my leg. Well, that was the last thing I did in uniform, was to break my leg. But immediately after that, I started a business which 15 years later we took public, and it didn't have anything to do with the Marine Corps, not even close. And so these types of things happen to us all the time, and they completely change your life in an instant.
I'll share May 5th, 2008, that exact same crash. I had just gone out to celebrate my self-published tarot deck. I just received all of the shrink wrapped. This was 2008, before Schiffer picked it up and I rewrote the book larger. So this is the first iteration. So I've worked on this deck from 2005 to 2008. May 5th, I've got shrink wrapped decks, boxes of them that just arrived from Canada, from the playing card manufacturer that I had fabricate them. Kinko's had just delivered my books, that little white book and the little lanyap that I was folding and cutting and putting in the boxes. And I was cutting, folding, and assembling Tarot in the Land of Mysterium. At that point was the Mysterium Tarot boxes on Photoshop photo paper that I templated from a package design that I made. So I'm cutting, folding, and assembling these decks on this antique farmhouse table that I just went and dropped a nice chunk of change on. And the phone, noon o'clock, starts ringing. Now at this point, it's 2008. I've had my own architectural firm for 6 years. I'm a sole proprietor. The phone rings. The phone rings again. By noon 42, 2.5 years of high dollar work under full-time contract that I have gone. And I'm sitting there with a deck in my hand, like a cannonball just went through my stomach. And it's like, it's all gone. And I remember literally rocking, like just from the shock. And then I looked and I closed my hand on, I said, don't lose that. And there was just that, this is my life preserver. Now, okay, go sell these decks. But that same thing, that my whole architectural business was gone.
Yeah.
So, but that same kind of tower experience. And then the tarot emerged right there out of it.
Right.
Jordan, it's like what Jordan said about the unknown, and what I hear in your story, Skip, is that like it's so hard to live with the unknown that, and of course, I'm not looking at it from the point of view of depression. This isn't from judgment, because I've been in dark places in my head too, where that seemed like a good idea, and I'm glad I didn't, I perished the thought. But
Yeah.
the idea that at least I can control this, like it might be the end of my life, but it's on my terms, as opposed to things. What if things worked out? What if they didn't? But being so afraid of the uncertainty of it, that's really what we fear. A lot of us feared life, and there's been times in my life where it's life that I feared more than death. So it's learning to live in life.
And
Well,
like in
that's the
training, in training, when you can't go anymore, I mean, you are spent. Keep going, because when you can't go any longer, you're probably 3 millimeters from that finish line. You're just about to make the jump.
Yeah.
Yeah, very definitely. And things can come back in amazing ways. I mean, I actually, that public business that I started, I've actually lost it like 3 different times, and it keeps coming back to me. Okay. Wow. It's like I have a golden thread on it. And I mean, you saw it one night when I had to drop it off of here and go take a call that involved the US, Dubai, India, and Kuala Lumpur. And you go, oh my God. And meanwhile, here we are with Nicole in Australia, Raquel in Brazil, and the rest of us around the US. The world is changing just so fast.
Well, and that day, I remember specifically because then we went from we're having a discussion to all of us chattering, Skip, mute. You're talking to us, not your call. I remember that whole evening. It was funny. And then we realized, oh, okay, he can't hear us. He doesn't have the headphones on anymore.
Yeah, I finally realized it, but I mean, I actually have very little recollection of that call because I haven't been involved in that particular aspect of the business since then. But
that you could just turn to your right and go onto an international call. Then you're already on an international call here with us, and turn to a different one. It's kind of a stunning kind of fact these days that we can do these things.
Yeah.
Technology.
I mean, 100 years ago, you still could actually learn everything there was to learn. That information-wise, books-wise, it was out there in all languages. And the technology curve versus the evolution curve, it's just you couldn't learn it all now, nor would you want to. I mean,
well, the thing is that we have to learn to be the fool. Okay, right. And we'll be talking about the fool later on, actually right before the inauguration, but which is so
that's
apt,
nice.
Of course.
It is. That's no accident. I know you planned that.
But well, it happened by synchronicity. Let's put it that way. But but the thing is, we have to learn and accept that we're going to be the fool, and that we have no clue what we're going to be doing. And, I started to study the Tarot 25 years ago, and I really jumped into it like a fool, which was, one fine day we decided we wanted to offer Tarot readings over 900 numbers, except we were running the 900 numbers out of Madras, India, now Chennai. and so I literally got on an airplane. I didn't know anything about the Tarot personally. And I flew to Chennai, took a 5-hour lesson, from an Indian mystic on how to read the tarot.
Mhm.
And the next day I started to train 40 Indian men to read the tarot in the US on 900.
Well, I love that story. I mean, I love that story. I mean, and people, I mean, I know some tarot professional would scoff at that, but I'd rebut. You know, I'm 4.5 years old and my mom hands me the book and I'm like, Mom, I'm not doing the reading. The cards are just telling me stories. So you get just enough information to be dangerous and you took off running. And it's like,
exactly. And
actually, it's very Teddy Roosevelt of you. It's like,
and we actually did that. You know, we actually did it for a couple of years.
That's excellent.
And
it's really Teddy Roosevelt of you. Yeah, it's like Teddy Roosevelt.
But then I put the cards aside and didn't pick them up again until 2017 when my Jung group, this group, originally wanted to learn something about it. And I said, well, okay, I'll teach you how to read the tarot. and so we did, I don't know, several weeks
that's just awesome.
Of how to read the tarot. So you can see how rudimentary those were because they're still on the channel. And I give links to that playlist, but you know, I don't claim that particular teaching was very good, but it would get someone started to do readings. But you know, now I've come to realize that it's much more important than that. It's really about psychological development.
Right.
And if we understand these things, then we're going to be a lot better off in life.
Right.
Yeah, that to me is so very profound, because I know we can all mutually appreciate that point, but I think back to the time when the tarot was made, and you know, so many people, particularly those in the Bota line of inquiry back into the tarot, always say, you know, these were secret teachings that these people encoded into these cards, and they made them with a visual, symbolic representation rather than writing it in a book, because they had to keep it secret. They had to encode it, and it's there for you to discover. And I think it's a really great testament to that, you know, so many people have tarot decks for, you know, 30 years, 40 years, however long. And then eventually they realize, wow, there is so much to this. I might not even be able to hit the bottom. And it's like, I think everybody puts their own stuff into the cards as well. But I think that as a symbol system, it truly is also just that deep and that rich.
And there is a secret that can't be told. I mean, it can be.
Is it spirit? Is it the fifth suit?
No.
God is real?
I'm just kidding.
No, the secret. The secret is that you can tell all the secrets, and there's still mystery there.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think to speak to that directly too, Nick, you knocked that point home when I was showing the Six of Wands in the Library of Esoterica, and you went, "Oh, it's like the ladder to Tifereth," and I'm like, I didn't even know about the Tree of Life when I was, you know, I hadn't gotten to that special study, but that was in there. So the fact that I was picking up on something imagistically, you know, graphically, visually, things are encoded there that were even ciphered from me, and I was the one making it, you know. So
yeah, and it's like,
and they're
you know,
still clear.
Yeah, and you know, Jung always talks about, or anybody involved in work with the unconscious, is that the image is the language of the unconscious.
Yes,
it does not contact us with any kind of language, and I think tarot works in the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the variety of decks that we've shown just tonight clearly shows it too, but it's the point that it's not one image. Okay, all of these different images point back to the same thing.
Yeah, there's what
it reminds me of how things get to the point where they're so confusing that it just breaks down to its simplest primitive form, and that ends up being the wisest thing. That reminds me of what, you know, just thinking about this class, and you've been saying it over and over, and then I just kind of got it in a different, hit me in a different way, is like, we have all this technology, all this endless information, and even each of us as individuals would find each other over the internet so we can talk about this 78 card system to get some meaning that is actually simplified. You know, it's not from an endless Google search,
Right.
because we need that simplification.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And there's, thought really only leads to more thought. If you can't really apply it and do something meaningful with it for yourself, it's really just going to lead to more and more and more, and a boat that says never enough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
My
and
little, my little red ball, we all live in chaos.
Yeah.
And
I'm going with just enough information to be dangerous.
that's
and
that.
every once in a while, you want to heighten the danger. Every once in a while, just kneel down at the Google Oracle and ask a question.
right. But you have to be able to step away from the chaos.
Yeah.
And look
Or
back and
surf
say,
it.
okay, what is this about? And boy, if my neighbor had understood the tower card in 2008, he might still be alive.
Mm-hmm.
Raquel, go ahead.
I'm just wondering what would be like to see like a tower moment in my country, and you guys are like talking about technology and how much information everyone has, but here in Brazil is like very different because the access of technology is really different from you guys, because we don't have access to the basic means of technology itself, like computers, cell phones are really expensive here in Brazil. So Brazilians actually like got into technology this last few years through social media exclusively, almost, because it's cheaper to buy a cell phone than to buy a computer. And through cell phone, you only have social media, because all the operators of telephonics gives like all the social media. So most of the information that my country gets is biased by those social medias. So
the same is true of here, most certainly.
But that's changing, exponentially too, though.
I totally get it, but for my country, I mean, it's changing, but for someone that already has like a social economical level that are able to buy those things, because when you guys are talking about the United States Tower moment, and you guys like have this moments actually, like 9/11 and things like that. I think the tower moment for Brazil is like when Portuguese arrived in our shores, and that's when it started, the Brazilian tower moment, and we still live in it, and I don't think that we had. Just a fun fact, some astrologers here in Brazil say that Brazil has a Pisces ascendant, and I totally agree with that, because like collectively we kind of like always in this mist of what's going on. We don't know, because the people of Brazil, even though we're like living a lot of bad things and really awful government and repressive and economic, like it's going to hell, even though we're all going through that, the people doesn't do anything, because we're not mobilized in that way. We're very
that will change too.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Raquel, I do have to.
And I hope that Joe Biden helps us to change that. Actually, I really do.
Yeah, I do have to say that Brazil is the origin of my favorite Formula One driver, Ayrton Senna. So thank you.
Wouldn't you say Brazil has a strong connection to its indigenous roots and its African roots, you were saying?
The indigenous roots, yes, but it's all like the problem with Brazil is that idea of racial democracy. That's something that we sold out for the world. It doesn't exist. It never existed, but the base of this idea is that we are all like a big mixed, and we are all races and everything. But all races turns out to be always a Caucasian expression of culture,
Yes.
So we kind of like minimize the indigenous roots to, just glorify everything that's white.
I want to comment on that because there's a couple things, and I'll try to tie it to tarot. But one of the things, well, I'll just start on the racial part, is like, okay, that's one of the reasons I don't, some Black people go, oh, I'm Black, even though like I'm fair and I have a white mother. So I know people who choose, and I've gone through my own stage where I'm like, no, I'm just Black, right? But then I've come to realize that actually that can cause the erasure of women who are dark skinned, because in the media, in popular media and advertisements and movies, it's the lighter skinned women who can be a stand-in for Black people as a whole. So that's why I try to respect, okay, well, I actually am both of these things, and it's all relative. Back to tarot, and the idea of, the reason I asked about indigenous is because the revolution might not be like overt and through technology. It might be by holding on to what the roots are. And that might not necessarily apply to Brazil. I don't know enough about Brazil to really speak on that. But I think about artists like Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, who chose to, and Frida Kahlo's father was German also, so she was mixed, but who chose to, instead of going forward, go back to the original and wear the indigenous garb and celebrate what some would consider primitive, but some people think that's stronger because it was a, what's the word I'm looking for? A prototype of things.
Here
and more
we
connected
have
to nature.
Here we have like this idea of, some of intellectuals and artists have this idea of going within, like preserving our culture within the norm, the Brazil
The white
repressive norm, So some intellectuals call it like a game that you have to play, like you preserve your culture and your roots, but instead of like clashing against the norm, you kind of stick with it, and you bring the norm to talk to you and to play your game. So
this is really fascinating.
Yeah, and it's a really effective form of resistance, because it's kind of like a passive one, you don't clash your enemy, you have to talk with him, and you have like to talk to him in a way that he understands you, and he comes and play and live your culture as well.
That's like hoodoo. That's like hoodoo. And if we were talking divination, Catholicism and Christianity is mixed in there with African religions and indigenous religions, and kind of like how polytheism in the Catholic Church, or like is through the saints. So when the Europeans came and were like, oh, you indigenous people have to practice Christianity, they're like, sure, we'll practice Christianity, wink, but they were really doing goddess worship through Mary and polytheism through all the saints. And gospel music came from incorporating drums, from African cultures and slavery. So like with the white man's religion of Christianity. So there's a whole bunch of blends like that. I love that.
Yeah, here in Brazil is very present. And
Sorry,
what, Nicole?
No, you just really sparked a whole chapter doorway of, this is like a whole different topic, but it's really powerful because I did my dissertation years ago on Frida Kahlo, and nobody knew about Frida Kahlo then, but I was always interested in this cultural differences between women and the way they do things and the way they find individuation. Yeah, it's interesting.
I was just
there's
going
one
to
That had to be an interesting dissertation because Frida Kahlo is, I mean, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera were, there's just so much there. I mean, even if the politics and spy, it's a whole big, robust story.
If you think about it, Frida herself was kind of a tower because she went through a lot and she just expressed her artistry through pain, you know, because she went through like this horrible accident when she was really young and she was not able like to function it well, and that where her art came through, you know. It was
what else? You know what else that reminds me of in terms of individuation that I think is important to bring up? It has to do with male and female, but it's a lens through which to prove my point. Nicholas disappeared when I said that. Is like Diego.
It was all because of you.
Yeah.
You were that powerful.
My words are so powerful. No, but I was thinking about how maybe I don't know enough about Frida Kahlo to make this a solid point, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
And then I'm going to talk about Zora Neale Hurston. Okay. So Frida Kahlo was married to Diego Rivera, and his art was a big deal because, you know, he incorporated indigenous people, like working the land and all this stuff. And that's what makes us strong. And so that was a political statement, right? That if you think about it, centered also white people to be like, no, look, we're strong. Like this, we're going back to prove we don't need to have your culture. But Frida Kahlo, being a woman, I think, number one, but also because of her injuries and all that, she made these political statements, but I believe they were like less overt because she was talking about personal individuation, personal pain that I'm not sure Diego Rivera ever really tapped into because his was about this more public outside revolution. And in the same way, this has happened with Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God. She is a Black female writer, really fascinating life story if you look into it, who was around during the Harlem Renaissance. She was a sociologist, so she was a learned woman, but she wrote a lot in African-American vernacular and celebrated that, and, you know, her Florida roots and all this. And she wasn't recognized during her lifetime, you know, like it was after she died. And I think it was Alice Walker found her book and like celebrated. She had this resurgence, you know, and Oprah made The Color Purple movie and whatever. Wait, no, she didn't write that. Sorry, different book. Ouch, that sucked. Okay, bomb. Bring it back up. My point is, Zora Neale Hurston wasn't appreciated during her time because it was a boys' club, because all the Black men during the Harlem Renaissance were having light shown on them when white people were like, oh, Black people can do things. They have abstract thought. Look, and all the men were writing books to prove their worth, if you think about it, to white men, to prove that Black men were men too, see? But Zora Neale Hurston, no one paid attention because she just wanted to write love stories. She was not interested in being political at all. In fact, she was sort of apolitical. And she's like, I don't have to prove that Black people are awesome. I've always known that. I don't feel insecure. I don't have to prove anything to you. But it's like that whole thing. I'm coming to the end here. But like, what did Anais Nin say that about like when women tell their story? Oh God.
When women tell their story, what?
I'm going to Google it after this, but it's basically like, when a woman tells the truth of her life, like that is a revolution. That is enough. That's a political statement just for a woman to tell.
Yeah, that's a nice.
And if you go compares like the memory of those great names, everybody knows Frida, and kind of like Diego became like her shadow.
Sidekick.
Even though, yeah,
he's just doing some like drawings, and now, you know, he's her drafts person, you know.
But I'm thinking about like I'm sorry, Samantha, you want to say something?
Talk over me. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking about like we all are talking how like the tower moment is also like this moment where the intellect kind of gets a blow, you know, and the use of words are not enough anymore. And as Nick said in the beginning of the session, like when you have to communicate with someone that you don't know, or you don't know how to, the language of that person, you have to communicate somehow with them. And then I think that empathy is a way to communicate as well. And I think that that is what leaves us when we don't know how to speak or talk to each other, you know. And I think that women, as being like normally, or maybe just more naturally drawn to the receptiveness, the receptive part of the thing, I think that comes naturally to us to be more empathetic, you know, and to try to communicate without the use of words, you know. And
Well,
Frida was always like really political, but we just realized that she was, like, years later, that she was gone.
so what would you say if I told you that I'm probably the only American male executive who has made $1 million sale while wearing a full-length evening gown?
$1 million sale of what? And
In Saudi Arabia, you were in Saudi
Do
Arabia.
you have
or
a
Turkey?
picture?
I do have a picture.
So yeah, Saudi Arabia, or Turkey.
That's
I would say, can I borrow a little bit of money?
yeah. Invest in.
Well, who was it recently? Was it this group? No, it wasn't. It was somewhere else. Where in Saudi Arabia, the women would be sitting inside the restaurant, and there's one-way mirror glass. Was that you?
I was
telling
the
me?
one that
You were
was
telling that.
Right.
And
It
then
wasn't
the
a
guys are all
restaurant.
primping, thinking,
Yeah.
you know, looking in the mirror outside. And the women are right there inside, just staring at him, and they can't
Right.
see him. And they're all, you know, trying to get it all right. And
Right.
yeah, that's a great story.
Hilarious. That was actually at the National Guard Hospital in Riyadh.
Oh, wow. I love that, though. $1 million sale and an evening gown. That's
I have a situation that's coming up that I would just like to share, and it's anecdotal. You know, it's not. I can't point to one particular case, but I think we can all at least appreciate it as kind of as just a skeleton of a situation. But I'm thinking of I don't know, some documentary that I've seen where a very science-minded person, you know, I think somebody who's probably is a scientist, has a PhD, has a very confirmed ego existence in the world, and you know, the type of person that if you really need to communicate something to that defies rationality would say, no thanks, don't want to hear it, I know what I know and you can't tell me anything. And he was put in a situation to where I think it's coming back to me. Okay, it's from a show that Morgan Freeman did called I think it's On God, About God, something like that. But he just goes around the world and talks to tons of different cultures about their experience of God. And this guy who had a very scientific orientation to the world had an experience to where he essentially had to rediscover religion, and it was a major breaking down and building back up of his way of viewing the world. You know, I think that's obviously a tower experience, but B, that, you know, any way that we build up our ideals, whether it has to do with science or, you know, if I learned something in all of my study of the Kabbalah that was counter to what I thought I knew about the world, then I would have to, you know, deconstruct the towers that I've built for myself and have to put something in place that was built on firm ground. But you
Nick,
know,
did you ever listen to my lecture from last fall? It's about 14 months ago, called "Finding the Living God."
I want to say that I did, but I you know, I can't think of anything right off the top of my head.
Okay, well, it's about that and how that happens. Okay. How the scientist comes to know that God exists, and this is
Yeah, and that's
I'm not
also,
talking about the God up there. I'm talking about the God in here. But
yeah.
um,
Yeah, and that's why I say in the devil card, that he's got the Mercury sign on his navel, and that is why, because Mercury represents the intellect, and for those people, the intellect can just make a real devil out of you. If you know what you know, and nobody can tell you otherwise. Like, what's it going to take really to break that way of thinking down? I mean, ultimately,
well, the
a
tower
strike of
experience
lightning.
what
Exactly,
does
exactly, and it follows the devil for that reason.
Raquel put it really well when she said the intellect takes a big hit. I mean, that's your expectations get clocked. Your bell's rung. You're on the floor before you even know what happened. But that's that intellect. The expectations takes a hit. And there's that. Skip comes in and he'll perish the thought. Because everything around you is gone that you counted on, that you built, is gone.
Absolutely. And yet it's not. I mean, at some point in the future, I will talk with you about the golden thread, but because it's beyond the scope of the tower, but it's about how. I mean, basically, you have to build relationships. It's about how the golden thread is the golden thread that brings Nicole and Raquel here, okay, into this group. That why have they become regulars in this group? Well, there's something that is meaningful to them, and so it makes it really a global enterprise what we're doing, and literally this has become the most popular thing on my YouTube channel, and it's because of that golden thread. People, I mean, we still have 19 people watching us on YouTube after 2.5 hours. And that's pretty remarkable. And so there is a connection that stays, that is that can't be broken. Okay. And I can't really tell you about how that might be in the future, but at the moment, but there are some really amazing things that are happening in my life that can affect all of us, and in ways that you cannot imagine right now. And so, Raquel, what I would say to you about Brazil is it's going to change a lot faster than you think. And I don't mean within 5 years, I mean next month, or, things are changing in the world so fast. And just give you an order of magnitude. When I first started to go to India, there were no cell phones. Cell phones were not allowed in India. And the government wanted to control telephony. And so if I wanted to make an appointment with somebody while I was coming in from the airport in a taxi cab, I couldn't do it. And it took 3 hours to get from the airport in Bombay to the hotel where I could make a phone call. And today, everyone, 30 years later, everybody in India has a cell phone, and or essentially everybody. And I just give you an example of how this change happens. A friend of mine is Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize for economics. Okay, and he started the Grameen Bank. But let me preface this. I was working on telephony in India, and the Minister of Telecommunications said to us at a conference here in Washington that there are 600, at that time, there were 600 villages in India with no cell phone, okay? With no cell phone, no telephone communications whatsoever to 600,000 villages in India. And on that same, or at that same time, I went to Bangladesh and I sat down with Muhammad Yunus and I was telling him this story. And he said, oh, well, we solved that problem because we founded Grameen Phone. Okay, he had started the Grameen Bank, which is another story, but the cell phone, he said, what he did was he gave a telephone to every village. Somebody had a telephone, and he said, you know, here's a telephone. You charge 4 taka per minute. I charge you 2 taka per minute, so that you can keep 2 taka per minute. And he put a telephone in every village in Bangladesh in like a month. And here's the minister of India, of telecommunications in India, and he can't work it out. Another example was he wanted to automate Grameen Bank, now let's see how this worked. Anyway, the sum and substance of it was an American company came in and offered to automate the bank for $5 million. And he did it in like 5 minutes just by hitting it a different way. And so for banking, what he did, the Grameen Bank was, which is what won him the Nobel Prize, was that he went to every village in Bangladesh. He sent people on bicycles. He had bank officers on bicycles that would go out to all these villages, and he would create lending groups of 5 people, and somebody could borrow money to create a business. Like a woman wants to be a dressmaker, but she didn't have a sewing machine. So he would loan her a sewing machine so that she could make dresses. But the condition was that the other 4 people in their group couldn't borrow money until she paid her loan back. Okay. And so it was like a group like this group of 6, and you know, you can go do your business and you have the loan, but none of us can get a loan until you pay your loan back.
And we help you get your loan back?
Huh?
So do we help you get your loan back with your business?
Of course. Huh? So you start buying dresses from me, or you start, you know, you start doing business with me in my business that we funded with this, so that now you can borrow money and you can get your business started, whatever it is, you know, whether it's bicycle repair or
well, and that's an old urban design principle. It's wealth creation instead of wealth production. That's right. That's really strong.
Well, it's strong enough to win a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
What do they call that? What do
community banking, it's called. Nowadays, it's called community banking. But those sorts of things can happen, and they can happen just because people get an idea, right? And so, I mean, Muhammad Yunus just made a monkey of that minister of telecommunications of India, because he's sitting there saying, oh, it's going to take 10 years to get a telephone to every village in India. And Muhammad Yunus says, you know, send a cell phone to every village in Bangladesh.
Just drop the die in the water and watch it move.
Here's a cell phone. You charge 4 taka, you pay me 2 taka per minute.
I don't know what the meaning is here, but what I feel to be unavoidable about the situation, both in your case and in the case of Brazil and Raquel is that cell phones have everything to do with communication and language, and they also run off cell phone towers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we elected our president majorly through communication of a telephone.
And it's interesting. It's also very interesting to me. I mean, I know in the U.S. several studies have been done and shown that in spite of increased communication, that people are lonelier than they have ever been, more isolated than they have ever been, and more depressed from feelings of loneliness and stuff, which I think is just obviously a paradox, but, you know, a very telling bit of data about the real situation is that even though communication may be ramped up, we're obviously communicating the wrong parts of ourselves to everybody.
Well, I don't
Well,
know.
you know, when
might
you
take-
see people like this, and they never move from this, you know, and it's
Yeah.
like a Linus blanket.
Yeah, I traveled to San Francisco last year, and walking around the city, I mean, it was literally like every person I could have walked up to, punched in the face, tried to take their wallet, do whatever, just because they're all walking around like
Yeah.
walking down busy streets, and it's just like, oh my God.
Come to
I've walked into walls at the
Oakland.
shopping mall.
Darwin would have had a freaking heyday with these people.
You need to go to the other side of the bay to Oakland, California, because that's where the soul is. It's the same thing with Brooklyn and Manhattan. Seriously, as you go to the.
Yeah, I've been to all the boroughs in New York, and
Have you been in downtown Oakland?
I have not. We didn't go to Oakland when we were there, sadly. We flew into San Francisco and we traveled north from there, so missed out on Oakland, sadly.
Well, don't judge us all by San Francisco. That's all I have to say. My Bay area.
Yeah, I probably
Skip.
won't be going back to San Francisco. Too much poop. I mean, I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's a major homeless. I would guess maybe not.
There's a
problem,
housing
but
crisis.
population.
It's
Right.
the same with big cities in Brazil.
Yeah.
Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo.
Yeah, but
the smell is something like
yeah,
you will never forget.
piles of human feces.
Yeah.
Pretty much everywhere that you can walk. So.
Gentrification and pushing
Literally too
people
much
out
poop.
though is part of that, because San Francisco has changed a lot, and Oakland's changing now for the same reasons. You know, people are losing housing; they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but on the other hand, okay, so here's a couple of tower things. One, yesterday we did a birthday celebration for my mother-in-law, and because of COVID, nobody could come, but we did a Zoom session, and we had 29 different people logging into it, and 29 different connections, and about maybe 35 or 40 people. Some of them were people she hadn't seen for 20 years or more.
Wow.
And it was just awesome. And my wife bought her a ladyship in Scotland, which really thrilled her, because you can't be a lady in Scotland unless you own land. And so this entrepreneurial company bought an acre of land in Scotland and divided it into one square foot
pieces. Yeah, you can be a lord for $49.99.
And so because of that, my wife organized a member of the St. Andrew's Society to come on to the meeting, complete with a Scotch hat and in an entirely authentic Scottish brogue, present her with her ladyship. So now it's her ladyship, Geneva McLaughlin, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, but then here's the tower experience. We hung up from that call, and then Debbie's cousin, Geneva's nephew, had a heart attack, and so he's now in the hospital in Richmond. I mean, immediately after that call, it was,
Wow.
and that's a tower experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we're having tower experiences all over the country nowadays because everybody everybody knows somebody who has died. You know, also in that call yesterday, Debbie's cousin died from a drug overdose last weekend. And
Right.
so, you know, there was a whole section of the family that was there yesterday, and her cousin said, you know, thank God we did this, because it really has helped my family to sort of reconstitute after, you know, and that was another side of the family. And so right now we have, we've lost 5 people to drug overdoses in the last 3 years, and we've lost 5 people to COVID in the last 9 months.
Wow.
People that we personally know or are related to. And so those are tower experiences, big time. And you have to learn, you have to figure out how you're going to go on. And
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to reiterate, when I say communications, I mean really like cellular communications. You know, I'm not saying anything negative about what we're all doing here. Although I'm sure if you search for long enough, you could probably find something negative to say. But, you know, I personally have loved this, and it has presented me with so many opportunities to meet great people like all of you that I otherwise would have never had the opportunity to meet. But what I really mean is, you know, the way in which we communicate via social media and stuff like that. That's just a giant externalization of our egos.
sure,
Well, and
that's
I
changing.
agree here, where I mean this communication to me is not me just Linus blanket staring at my screen. This is substance and action and enacting, and the exchange. I mean, I have a heartfelt connection to all of you. I mean, we have these different perspectives, and it's just to me, it's such a robust group. I discovered it by accident. I happened to find Becca Tarnas, and then I'm like, who's this skip.conover dude he's her moderator? And I'm like, oh no, he's got the show. She was just on it. Oh, so then I type in, you know, who the heck Skip Conover on Google. I'm like, oh, look at the company. He's the real deal. I'm going to sign up. And I laugh because I went to register, and instead of registering on YouTube, I accidentally clicked panelist. I didn't even think about it. And I'm like, you know, it's not in the back of my head that I'm a tarot author or I'm a Jung aficionado, and it's one of my things, but I'm like, panelist. And I get this thing back, you know, welcome to, I'm like, panelist. Am I qualified to be a panelist? What the heck? So I just showed up. It's like,
it's so cool. I mean, I got hooked because you guys complimented me. You guys complimented my comment.
well, yeah, we Red Rover pulled you off YouTube.
Yeah, and I was like lonely, and I was like starting to do tarot. I was like, okay, like start my business. So I came on, and I can't stay away now. I really loved it.
Yeah, well, I keep watching for more candidates here.
Yeah,
that's why I watch the YouTube chat all the time.
I meant what I said, you know, I meant what I said in those comments and stuff. But I just think that this is an example of how the right way to use technology.
Oh yeah.
Because every culture has had to contend with this. It's not a new thing,
right.
You know.
Really.
And so I think that's part of the reconstituting after the tower moment. It's like with our egos, you know, we get humbled, but then it's like we need to identify with something in order to survive in this world. Right?
Yeah. It's been really surprising to me too, the amount of, I mean, you know, one thing that I definitely miss is just being in a room with people, all the nonverbal below the threshold communication that occurs. But at the same time, I've been pleasantly surprised to really actually feel like I'm able to have a connection with people through this technology. And it's not just faces
one
on a
thing that I
screen
do
somewhere.
want to emphasize about this card is that it is about an internal experience too. I mean, sure, there are major external things that change our lives, like a heart attack or, you know, a broken leg or what have you. But but what this card is also referring to, which is covered in the Meditations on the Tarot, this 650-page tome on 22 cards. It's really an amazing book, but one of the things that is emphasized for this card is that your psyche is self-regulating. And if you get too ahead of yourself, your psyche is going to come and whack you internally. Okay,
Yeah.
Both things are happening internally, and it's covered in the Bible, and so it's worth mentioning here as we sort of aim toward wrapping up, because we're getting long again. But
can we see the Splendor Solace deck before we conclude here?
Yes, you can. But it's covered in Luke 14:11. I said this at the beginning. He who exalts himself will be abased, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And that is a natural function that goes on in your psyche. And so if you get yourself too wound up about your own self-importance, you're very quickly going to get knocked down by you.
By you, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, Splendor Solace.
Well,
what did you say, Nicole? I'm sorry.
That happens to me fairly regularly. Like I can recognize the feeling now when I'm really at that. Like the last one happened recently when I was out with some girlfriends on my birthday, and we were just so in that space of openness and freedom, and she had a near-death experience. She started choking, and it just took us all back to this, but what is really interesting while you've been talking about this group, what I think is really, one of the things that really speaks to me is the cultural mix and the diversity, but also it's like educational perennialism. Like we're not just regurgitating facts and sitting in a classroom and listening to, we're having a dialogue, we're having conversations and we're open to any and all communication via each person. No one gets shut down. So it's just awesome, because the pieces that drop into my consciousness are totally different to the pieces that drop into Samantha's consciousness and Raquel's. Everyone's got their own knowledge, but then this other stream coming through, and it just creates a really great, it is raising your consciousness in an empowered way, because you're not listening to a so-called authority figure, someone standing up there saying, well, I know everything, you should listen to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And the collaboration causes us to evolve tarot. I mean, together, I think we are a group that is, we are evolving tarot by doing this, slow over time. I mean, the turtle, you never complained about anyone who makes progress, and the tortoise always wins. The hare is just a manatee all over the place, and the tortoise experiences every little step, probably stops at the finish line. What's this cool big white line on the asphalt? It's really attractive. Oh, this is where I'm supposed to go. And then he continues, so it's not he's sprinting across. So I think we're evolving tarot just in this group.
We definitely are.
What's the quote that you have on your YouTube homepage, Skip? He who knows God comes to have an effect on him.
Right. Precisely. Yeah. That's the point, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to give you the Splendor Solace. I had it up, but then I was responding. Oh, there it is. Okay.
I would like to lodge a formal request for, if you don't mind, to just maybe begin putting this a little bit sooner in the sequence. I always really look forward to seeing this card, but by the time that we get around to it, I'm usually so burnt out. I don't have anything productive to say. I would like to.
He does it so you won't leave early.
Really interesting. interesting.
I'll
It is
try.
interesting because it's the two different viewing platforms within the one card. That's what's, because it's got
Just
two
like-
frames.
Just like
And
how
the
we're
inner one is the divine feminine.
Which
That's
is
just my
also
thing.
inner vision. Yeah, inner vision,
No,
the divine
vision,
feminine.
Yeah.
This reminds me how we're on Zoom and on YouTube at the same time. So we're
Yes.
being framed within a frame.
Yes, we are on Zoom
Yeah.
and YouTube.
So God is watching us right now.
That's for sure.
YouTube.
You're right. You're right. I am watching you.
Right.
You should say it at the same time, you in a low baritone voice and me in a high voice. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
I am watching
Watching
you.
you.
Okay.
All right,
So
splitting
do
souls.
you want to hear
So,
why
yeah,
the White
let's-
Queen is the tower?
I would love
Yeah,
nothing
yeah.
more than to hear the White Queen.
Okay, so,
Yeah, because
so
where's
for
the Red
those
King?
of you who
That's-
don't know,
yeah.
the Splendor Solis is a series of 22 pictures that were painted in 1582 by Sebastian Brandt, I believe. There is a deck called the Splendor Solis deck. And it so happens that I have here a signed and numbered copy of the book. I have number 77 of 78 signed copies.
God's favorite.
Yeah. And yeah, and it adds up to 5, right? It's
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so I'm reading about the White Queen. I am the White Queen, inner alchemy of the tower, house of God, Lord of the hosts of the mighty. I come that your ambition for light may grow, giving courage to be healed, made open, restored. I am artisan of the active or exciting intelligence through which every existent being receives its spirit and motion. I stir up activity producing transformative changes. All Venus-Mercury experiences in the 4 worlds are woven into my alchemical path. I bring creation's lightning flash down towards form, crossing the upward impulse of the middle pillar to establish the great crossroads tower of the personality. As radiant White Queen, I am the inner vision of the tower under mercurial skies. My great teaching project unfolds to topple ego's babel of voices, rebuilding finer structures for the growing light of self-knowledge. Dear alchemists, mine are the liberating arts which give you power to free yourself from incarnation in outworn ideas. Dynamic as Mars, I increase the power of the fire's heat on the earth, and so that its congealed part is dissolved and made bright. Call in those fiery rays of wisdom and eternal illumination. Dare to give voice to new, more radiant philosophy. House my divine hosts with grace.
The most beautiful Splendor Solis card, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I think the point about this is that, you know, the anima is always going to get things moving.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is the White Queen, you would expect then, where's the Red King? And he's distributed through all these red male dressed figures below. He's broken up. I mean, he's...
I think also just to go into the alchemy for a second without going very far is that it has to do with the albedo, the whitening, but in between the blackening, the negredo, and the albedo, it goes through a blue. So you see, obviously she's cloaked in blue. She has a blue orb. The rider above the frame is blue. So I think it has to do with that, going from the negredo of death, and negredo meaning the blackening of the death card and the devil card, now to things going from black to blue to white.
This
Well, and
gives new meaning to me of the blue fairy, like in Pinocchio.
Oh, yeah.
I just think fairy tales, yeah, it's like simplified secular versions of these more spiritual or religious concepts. But
You think fairy tales are secular?
well, I'm about to be challenged, so I don't know. I mean, that's how I make.
I mean, I don't think they have any overarching religious belief, and so maybe secular in that sense, but they definitely
it's the
point
same.
to a religious experience in their own way, I think.
I think it's sort of like, I think what it is sort of like, it's like taking morals out of an institution and then normalizing or popularizing them by telling them through simple children's stories.
Right.
So
And these are all narratives.
Right.
Everything that we're doing is educating people. Because people are educated by narrative. And so here what we're doing is encouraging people to pay attention to what the tarot cards mean in general, but understand that this is a very complex area and it relates to all of our lives. And in some cases, as I've discussed tonight, understanding these things can be a matter of life and death, literally. And, I mean, in many ways, I mean, when I broke my leg and I had my leg up in the air for 13 weeks, I could have easily started to drink and going down the tube of the alcoholic. My grandfather did that. That happened to him.
Runs in the family.
Yeah, and he was literally Willie Loman when I knew him in my teenage years, right? But I mean, I've rehabilitated him in my own psyche now, and so he has a different meaning to me now than he did then. But that's part of the point, that you can rehabilitate, because you can go back. I mean, we're in the advanced group, we're talking about Lament of the Dead. And, my grandfather lived at a very difficult time. He had a business in 1929 that he lost because of the crash of 1929. And then he had to scramble to support his young family. My father, who was his oldest child, was born in 1922. So my father was 10 years old when the Depression was really getting cooking. And yet he was able to give them a decent life. And he did the one thing that very likely made my life possible, which was he figured out how to get my father into the Naval Academy. And so my father was in the U.S. Naval Academy during the entire World War II, okay, or almost the entire World War II. He started in 1942 and graduated in 45. There were 5 classes that graduated in 3 years. And so, my grandfather had the perspicuity to figure out how to get that done, to realize it needed to be done and to get it done. And so what he did was he found a program in 1940, even before the war. So he knew the war was coming. And so before the war, he went to his congressman, and the congressman said, get your son to join the Naval Reserve as a sailor and apply for this program where you go 1 year to a civilian college and then you can go into the Naval Academy. And so that's what he did. And so he went to Penn for a year, University of Pennsylvania, and he actually worked there and worked and did a lot there. But his freshman year was at Penn, and then he went to the Naval Academy for 3 years. And so he actually did a 4-year college program, but 1 year of it was at Penn. And, you know, it kept him alive during World War II. And you know, and he, all the time he was serving in the military, because he had joined in 1940 so that he could be in this program. So, you know, that was a piece of vision for him, but
Yeah.
Pardon?
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, because I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So because he was serving at the academy, he didn't have to go fight. That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and you know, my dad did serve deployment during certain crises in the 1950s in the Mediterranean, but he really had a fairly mild Navy career by comparison to a lot of people. But
that's a lot of love.
Yeah, it took a lot of special things to happen in order to achieve that. And so, yes, later on, my grandfather's life sort of fell apart, and he did become an alcoholic, and he died at the age of 68. But you know, he had a life, and he had a lot of successes also in his life. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about them, and that's one of the reasons that I make videos, so that my grandchildren can know something about my life.
I too had a grandparent that was a veteran, had severe alcohol problems, and you know, I knew him when I was young. He passed when I was, I think, right when I turned 16, but you know, had been kind of receding into extreme old age for a number of years leading up to that. So while he was around in my very, very young years, I don't have a very solid impression of who he actually was. But you know, similar in that he was a veteran and had a drinking problem and stuff as well, and you know, didn't really leave behind much of an impression on me.
You honor your grandfather by your success and by your not following in his path. And the same thing with Nick. I don't know, Nick, if that's your intention or you want to do that, but I think about that because, you know, my sister passed. My sister, who is older than me now, well, I've surpassed her age now, and her birthday is coming up, so it must be on my mind. But you know, because you can have like survivor's guilt or grief, you know, and my therapist told me that actually I'm honoring her by living, like, instead of going, oh, I don't deserve it, it's like, oh, I'm going to live and enjoy my life, maybe do the things she couldn't, or maybe have a different relationship with my family or individuate in a different way, because I have a better idea of the value of what can be lost. And they even say that's true of, I think it was Brene Brown who studied grief. It goes back to the Tower, actually, but who is saying that people can feel embarrassed of their good fortune when they're around people who've experienced grief. But she interviewed all these people who went through grief and like war and losing family members early and all this. And she was asking them, how can other people who haven't gone through this better understand you? Like, how would you feel that they had empathy for you? And they all said that, for instance, if they lost a child and they were talking to someone who had a child still, they would say, actually, if that person really loves their kid, they take them home at night and they just love on them and they're present with them, then they understand what I lost.
Sure.
Because you know the value of it. And that's how I try to think of my life now, you know.
Yeah. And I try to make my children aware. I mean, my roommate at the basic school, which is the basic infantry class for new second lieutenants in the Marine Corps. My roommate for 5 months went immediately to Vietnam, and 5 months later was killed. And that was, quite shocking, of course. And so I always make sure that my children recognize what he did, because among other things, he made a certain sacrifice for me at the basic school, which meant that he went in the infantry and I went in the artillery. And as a result of that, I lived and he died. And so, not all military sacrifices are on the battlefield, right? That was a decision he made 6 months earlier. And, but it was a big thing. And so I try to live my life to honor his life and to, appreciate that. And I lost my brother too, 32 years ago, and he would be 39. He was 39 when he died. And we try to live according to what, he would want too. Obviously, those are important things. And losing people like that, boy, those are tower experiences.
Yeah. How do we survive all this? It's amazing. Like the things you go through that they hurt so bad you feel like you're gonna die. It's like, whoa, I'm still alive.
Well, you brought up Brene Brown, and how do we get through it? She says vulnerability is the birthplace of courage. You're strong enough to be able to be gentle. You can connect, and then I think we connect with each other.
I think it's a foreign concept to us that live in modernity, but I mean, really, it's kind of perennial wisdom that real growth happens in moments of intense stress, and it's not really in the comfort of our warm home and having food on the table always that things really happen. That's actually more like death. Things really get on pace when we're thrown into those incredibly intense, stressful, and stretching situations.
Yep.
Yeah.
The things that I know about having lost people is, and maybe a lot of people who listen to this channel haven't lost their parents yet, for example, but there are a few things that are encouraging, okay, because Ernest Becker said that we try to deny death all the time, and we try to not think about death and so on. And he talked about many ways. In fact, Bill Clinton took his book Denial of Death on his honeymoon, so it's said. It's a good book, but the point is that it's the point of Lazarus in the Bible. Okay, now when Jesus arrived at Martha and Mary's home, Lazarus had been dead for 2 days, and so when he came out of the home, the two women said that he resurrected Lazarus from the dead. But what he did was point out to them that Lazarus still lives in their hearts. And, my parents and my brother still live with me every bit as much as they ever did in their lifetimes. Okay, there was no change in that. Okay, so I can't have additional experiences with them, but in terms of their living spirit has not changed one iota because of their physical death. Okay. In other words, my mother is as close to me, my father's as close to me, my brother is as close to me as they ever were in life. And if you know that, it's very helpful to get through these things. I mean, it's not easy, of course, but you know, the other thing to know and put in your mind, and you know, it may shock some people to hear, but it's sort of a joke that my Turkish playwright friend told, which is when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. Okay. It's only difficult for your family. Okay. And when you're stupid, it works the same way.
Whoa.
Yeah, you can't quarantine stupid.
Right. And so the point is that, you know, when we go to a funeral, we're not, it's not really crying for the dead person. The dead person doesn't have consciousness anymore. And they, you know, if we euphemistically say they've gone to their reward or something, some bullshit like that, you know, the fact is they're dead. Okay, they're not suffering any longer, you know, and that's one of the reasons why I'm against the death penalty, for example, because you know, putting them to death is too good for a lot of the people that are sentenced to death. You know, it's
the easy way out.
And what if we're dead? I mean, what I mean by that is, what if really the existence of living is much more like being dead, and dying is much more like being alive?
Yeah.
Think about in all of Jung's sermons to the dead, he's talking to the dead, and it's like, we came back from Jerusalem where we found not what we saw it.
Yeah, that's a very important point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because what they sought was something that the Logos oriented church had taught them to seek, and that isn't to be found in Jerusalem. It's to be found in your heart.
Yeah, that you will not find what you need on the road you want to go down.
Right.
You will find what you need on the road you do not want to go down.
Yeah.
I want to have a whole class devoted to paranormal experiences, and I want to hear everyone's experience.
What about 3? Just a pair?
I'm sorry, what did you say, Samantha?
I want to hear about people's paranormal experiences.
Well, go listen to my Finding the Living God talk, which you can find very easily on the homepage of this YouTube channel.
I've definitely had tower moments. So with my beliefs, you know, like
what is that?
with my beliefs.
What are you very
tower moment?
Tower moments.
Oh, I thought you said Tara moment, like tiara. Okay, tower moments.
One hears what they want to hear, what's in their subconscious or whatever. But no, I just mean with being like, I don't believe, believing in, you know, Jesus, liberal Christian, and then being like, God doesn't exist, and then that
God does exist.
That didn't work for me. Yeah, that didn't work for me. It did not work out. But now I feel like I found God, and I have to again, but it takes conviction.
Yeah, but God is what they teach you. Okay, God is not Geppetto pulling your strings.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe in an afterlife or not. I think I do. It makes sense.
Well, you certainly should. Okay, because who are we talking about today? We're talking about Jesus Christ and Carl Jung, among others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They're not, you're telling me that they're not alive? They surely are alive.
Yeah, well, see, that's what I mean is like, is it alive through, is my sister's memory alive through me and in my memory, or is there an actual plane of existence where these people go? I don't think we know the answer. You can't prove it either way.
No, I can't prove anything, but I'm telling you how to best deal with it.
Telling me no?
No, I'm telling you how to best
No, I will.
cope with your issues.
Just
I just keep open
no,
mind.
it's
All I do.
Yeah, I always
Yeah.
think about stuff like that life just operates on a certain number of unanswerable questions. And I'm not saying that they're unworthy of contemplation, but I definitely do not think that they're worthy of group discussion.
Go
necessarily.
ahead, Raquel.
I just want to point out that in Haiti, through voodoo as a religion,
Yeah.
they don't actually like perceive death as the same as we do. I mean, sometimes I know a researcher here in Brazil that she did her thesis about the time that she spent in Haiti, and she actually said to us that every time that the government tried to like make a sense of the population, like counting people, you know, how many people have in a family and stuff like that, in some Haitian families there are like practitioners of voodoo, they count everyone that they know that they exist in their family as people that are living in a house. Like they count
Really?
everyone that has passed on, everyone that's dead in their
ancestors.
family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can promise you that that's true also.
Yeah.
And my brother came to me twice, and you know, you can say what you want about it. You know, it was a figment of my imagination, or it was a dream, or it was a vision, or whatever you want. But those people are alive. Where they are is not the relevant point.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, it's the
interesting
experience.
how much how there are societies that actually live very well with their own dead relatives, you know. And I think that here, like in Brazil, we have at least two great like Afro-Brazilian religions, and one that was actually like created in Brazil, that's called Umbanda. And that thing about the our loved ones that doesn't live here anymore, but they are with us somehow,
They
always.
surely are with you.
Mhm.
There's no doubt about that.
I find at funerals when I cry that opens me up, literally, and that's where the immortality of the memories solidify, as if they enter through the sacred adornments of my tears. Like my tears pour out for them to have a place to come in further.
Yeah.
And I think too that we have a concept for that. It's just because people in the West are so materialistic that we just tend to think about the exact same thing in terms of genetics. As saying, you know, we have our whole ancestry within all of our genetic makeup all the time living with us, but that's about as far as we go with it.
Yeah. One of the people on YouTube makes a comment, despite billions of witnesses, no proof. And I have to make the point that we're not talking about physical proof. And
on what topic?
Yeah, about God, or about afterlife. Okay. You know, what is the afterlife of Jesus Christ if it is not his spirit living within us? You know.
Well, yeah, and actually, I went to Sonu Shamdasani lecture yesterday afternoon, and there's I don't have the name. There's a guy in France who did some pretty solid NDE, near-death experience work with his dissertation. That came highly recommended. I'll find it. It's not relevant here, but
I think it's the questions that keep us going, like Nick said. It's like we have so many love songs because we can't describe love in a word. We have a word for it with love, that we have to go on about it, and it gives birth not just to words but songs and dances.
Right.
We begin to express ourselves abstractly because there's no way to pin it down to one thing. I think that's beautiful. They're eternal questions. They keep us going.
Yeah, and there's
Absolutely.
a limitlessness to experience. I mean, to not censoring yourself from your experience.
And I think that it a lot of time manifests in a kind of a tower situation, because it's like, no matter how much we know about the world, we don't know the fundamental questions of the world. Where do we come from? Where are we going?
Well, and adversity does not build character. It reveals it.
Yeah, well, the important point is that the Spirit is taking us somewhere. And this was the point that Dr. Jung made in 1957, which is, our religious leaders are all hypnotized by what happened 2,000 years ago, instead of asking the question, where is the Spirit taking us? And that's all of the world's religions have to be revamped for modern categories of understanding.
Yeah, in order to survive.
Yeah, we know things today that those early Iron Age men didn't have any clue about, and so that the Spirit has got them through and got a lot of people through. Also got a lot of people killed over the last 2,000 years, but the Spirit is taking us somewhere. And if you look in your room, everything that is in your room was at least at one time good. It might be just trash now, but you didn't acquire anything for your house that you didn't think was beautiful and you needed. Okay. And so that's where the Spirit takes us, or how the Spirit takes us. We pick things that we want in our lives, and and we haven't given enough thought to where the Spirit is taking us as a collective, as a species, not only as a nation state, but as a species.
I think,
and I also
go ahead, Raquel.
I think that as you all are saying, I mean, some things you really don't have to have an answer to live through it. The experience is everything that you have to have, because if you're going to fact check everything that you believe and that you do and that you see, you kind of will not live at all, because
in
that
fact,
takes
we don't
work.
live there. In fact, we
don't
don't
live there, right? We don't live there.
The reality is that the Logos is not alive. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's clinging to a bad life raft.
Yeah,
I tried doing that. It drives you crazy. I literally used to sit in my college dorm and try to.
I mean, for women's rights, what you need to know is that men have kept women down for thousands of years by blaming chaos on women. But chaos isn't women's fault, because we also live our lives in the eros. We live our lives in the eros. Chaos is not only, eros is not only chaos. Yes, there is chaos in the eros, but we also live our lives there. We don't live our lives in the Logos. I mean, you can take the Bible and use it for a doorstop.
Right. And that's the thing. Throughout history, shame is the worst cornerstone to base anything on. And shame and crowd control have been two things that people use as cornerstones, and
Yeah.
they're figments at best.
There are ways of
And-
controlling people.
Right,
Yeah.
crowd control. I mean,
And
best way to do something is to stir something up, unseat the footing, and then you can just kind of.
Not in this election. Sometimes the good wins.
Well, we'll see. Ask me
We'll see.
on.
Yeah, it's never fixed.
I don't want to say thank you too early.
First.
Yeah, you can just
I
rest.
just hope it gets better.
Well, we always know it's
Just a
always
little
going to
bit
get better.
better.
I just wondered, what about time?
It's
Better
always
to
gonna get
whom?
better. It's
Yeah.
always going to get better for the whole thing at once, because that's how the energy moves. It's how evolution moves. Our species is in a better place than it used to be, because why would we be alive? You know what I mean? I don't know. It made sense to me, what I just
Yeah,
said.
I mean, can we really even say that though? I mean, I got
Can we
into a
really say
conversation with a
what?
teacher
Get out.
yesterday. We were having a conversation along similar lines, and I was taking the stance that I don't think anything is really different. I mean, history is just repeating itself over and over and over, and it's like
That's right.
we can look to all these historical events that are exact mirrors of what we're going through, and we'll continue to go
That's why
through.
we have to understand the fifth stage of consciousness.
Right. Otherwise, every
And the
250
sixth.
years,
It's different.
it's
but
the empire cycle.
same. That's the whole conundrum. It's like reincarnation. Maybe it's a metaphor for like how we reconstitute throughout our lives. But if you think about it, we're the strongest swimmers, right? Like even by that's what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean?
I
Like
can't swim.
the fact that
Me
you're
neither.
I just
It's okay. I can swim well enough for both of you.
You know what I mean?
We're balanced. We're good.
Your mother's egg and your father's sperm were the strongest of what each of them had to offer from their body. And so odds wise, we were the ones who survived, not the other sperm we don't know about or the eggs we don't know about.
Yeah.
I don't know what it means. What does it mean, Skip? What I just said?
Well, and there's always the unexpected, right?
Well, in Texas, it's called reincarnation because you come back as a hillbilly.
Man, what is tarnation? I'm in North Carolina, and I hear people say,
Vernacular. You guys invented it.
"What in tarnation?" all
Yeah.
the time, and I just wonder what the heck is that.
It was invented in North Carolina. You
I mean,
imported it to Texas.
I've thought a couple of times it has to do with like Tar Heels, UNC, stuff like that.
Tarnation.
It can
I don't know.
has a
Probably doesn't
race-
have any meaning at all. It's
I think I don't have any idea. It's vernacular, colloquial, or colloquialism. I mean, it's not colloquia. It's a
My
The math
goodness.
is saying something.
we've been.
I was just saying that some people say that there's a racist origin to that. That's what I have heard because of
Tarnation?
dark and tar. Yes,
I mean, to be fair,
I don't
there's
know.
probably a racist tinge in every
there
Southern
be-
saying like
origin
that.
to
I mean,
To be fair, we ought to recognize that where Raquel lives, it's 1:30 in the morning, right, Raquel?
Yeah, it
Because
is.
partying
Oh,
with
we've been on here 4 hours and 22 minutes and 44. Wow.
the seconds really helps to put it in perspective.
Yeah, it's
So I really appreciate your being here, Raquel, and
Namaste.
I appreciate
and
it
Samantha,
being
you
here
need to
too.
bring that Breakfast Club thing. I expect next week for you to have Judd Nelson's joke.
what are we doing? The Star next week, right?
The
The
star.
star.
Hey, you guys.
That'll be more.
Hope is coming.
That'll be more uplifting, right?
Yeah.
I've enjoyed this conversation. Sometimes I get like antsy at the end and I gotta like go, but I was hooked the whole time. I'm hungry and I didn't even leave to go make dinner. I'm just hanging out with you guys.
So we're all basically sitting here, all curiosity, crisis mongers, staring at all the
Yeah.
destruction, sticking. Where are the cone zones? Look, there's blood over here. Come look. We're all sitting here hanging out. Let's have a picnic at the.
I'm not sure we solved any of the problems of the world, but we still have 15 people listening to us. Believe it or not.
Die hard.
Yeah.
You buddy.
Truly
15
you
die
other
guys for being
people
out there.
are as clueless as we are.
Yeah.
All right. Peace.
Well,
All right, bye
Thank
everybody.
you,
We're gonna call
everyone.
it-
Bye. Good
Yeah,
night.
Take care.
night.
See you again soon.